the vast and timeless world of Greek mythology, there are stories that linger in the mind, their echoes reverberating through the ages. One such tale is that of Perseus, a hero born of both mortal and divine blood, destined to face the greatest of challenges and rise above them with courage and wisdom. His story is one of fate and triumph, of quiet bravery and moments of peace, woven into the fabric of the ancient world. Born under a prophecy that foretold his grandfather's doom, Perseus's life was marked from the very beginning by the weight of destiny. Yet, despite the challenges laid before him, he would go on to achieve feats that would make him one of the most revered heroes of Greek myth. With the aid of the gods, his journey would take him to distant lands, where he would confront monsters, rescue a princess, and fulfill his fate. As we drift into the calm rhythm of this ancient tale, let us explore the myth of Perseus, not just as a hero of legend, but as a symbol of how even in the face of great trials, one can find strength and purpose. So, lie back, relax, and let the story of Perseus unfold like a gentle breeze, carrying you through the ancient world, where gods and mortals meet in quiet harmony. If you enjoy this story, please like, subscribe, and share with me where you're listening from, so we can continue to explore these timeless myths together. Perseus, one of the most beloved heroes of Greek mythology, is a figure whose story unfolds with the quiet intensity of a fated journey. Born of both divine and mortal lineage, his life is shaped by prophecy, adventure, and the deep bonds of family. Perseus's tale is one of courage and destiny, a myth that begins with the fear of a king and ends with the triumph of a hero. His mother, Danae, was a princess, the daughter of King Acrisius, who, upon learning of a prophecy that he would one day be killed by his own grandson, took drastic measures to prevent this fate. He cast Danae and her newborn son into the sea, seeking to rid himself of the child who might one day bring about his doom. But fate, it seems, is not so easily thwarted. The sea, as it often does in Greek myth, became a vessel of fate, and Perseus, with his mother, was carried to safety. This beginning, a humble and tragic one, marks the start of a hero's path that will lead him to the farthest reaches of the world and into the heart of the most dangerous of quests. In this tale of divine intervention, brave deeds, and quiet strength, Perseus stands as a symbol of what it means to be a hero. Someone who, though touched by the hands of the gods, must navigate the complex web of fate and choice. His story, unfolding with the rhythm of the stars and the calm of the sea, is one that continues to echo through the ages, teaching us the values of courage, justice, and the quiet power of destiny. As we begin this journey through Perseus's life, let us remember that heroes are not always born in grandeur. Often, they arise from the humblest of beginnings, guided by the unseen hands of the gods, and forever marked by the stories they leave behind. The story of Perseus begins long before his heroic deeds, with a prophecy that would shape not only his life, but also the fate of his family. Perseus was born to Danae, the daughter of King Acrisius of Argos, and Zeus, the king of the gods. Danae's story is one of both misfortune and divine intervention. She was a beautiful and virtuous woman, cherished by her father, who ruled over a kingdom in the heart of Greece. However, despite her beauty, Danae's life would take a dark turn when her father sought counsel from an oracle. The oracle, with solemn words, foretold that Danae would bear a son who would one day bring about the death of her father. The prophecy cast a shadow over the royal household, and King Acrisius, struck with fear and doubt, sought a way to avoid his grim fate. Desperate to escape the future foretold, Acrisius ordered that his daughter be locked away in a bronze chamber, sealed and isolated from the world, hoping to keep her from ever bearing a child. Yet even the most formidable king could not escape the will of the gods. Zeus, drawn to Danae's beauty and purity, found a way into her prison. Through the golden rain which fell from the heavens, he visited her in her solitude. This miraculous form of divine intervention resulted in Danae's conception of a child who, unbeknownst to her, would be the very one to fulfill the prophecy. When the child was born, Acrisius's fear turned to dread. His heart filled with terror at the sight of the infant Perseus. He knew at once that the prophecy would soon come to pass. To protect himself and to rid himself of the child, Acrisius made the difficult decision to cast Perseus and his mother into the sea. Perseus, a newborn in his mother's arms, was placed into a wooden chest, sealed and cast into the waves by his grandfather. The sea, vast and untamed, seemed like a cruel and final end. But the gods, whose will is often woven into the very fabric of fate, had other plans. As the chest bobbed on the waters, it was carried by the currents to the distant shores of the island of Seriphos. There, the chest was found by a humble fisherman named Dictys. The fisherman, a man of kindness and compassion, took in the child and his mother. Dictys's heart was moved by the sight of Danae and her infant son, and he offered them shelter. Little did he know, this child, so fragile in his innocence, was destined for greatness. The island of Seriphos, a peaceful place nestled among the waves, became the cradle of Perseus's early years. The child, raised by Dictys and his wife, lived a simple life, far removed from the concerns of kings and the weight of prophecies. Yet, even here, Perseus's destiny could not be denied. His strength grew, and so too did the power of his divine heritage. It would not be long before the forces of fate drew him back to the world from which he had been cast away. This peaceful period of Perseus's childhood, however, would not last. King Polydectes, the ruler of Seriphos, became intrigued by Danae's beauty, and soon he sought to make her his wife. Yet Danae, still haunted by her past and the tragedy of her treatment by her father, was not so easily swayed. It was her son, Perseus, who stood as an obstacle to Polydectes' desires. In an effort to remove Perseus from the island, Polydectes devised a cunning plan. He pretended to seek a grand wedding gift, one worthy of a great king. He asked each of his guests to bring a gift, knowing that Perseus, young and full of ambition, would be eager to prove himself. Polydectes' request, though seemingly innocuous, was actually a trap. He asked Perseus to bring him the head of Medusa, the most fearsome of the Gorgons, monsters whose gaze turned men to stone. Medusa's story was well known throughout the ancient world. Once a beautiful woman, she had been transformed by Athena into a monster as punishment for an offense committed against the goddess. With her hair of writhing snakes and a gaze that could turn the bravest of men to stone, Medusa was a creature of nightmares. To kill her was thought to be an impossible task, a challenge too great for any mortal. Polydectes, however, knew that Perseus's divine lineage might give him the strength to succeed where others had failed. The young hero, though unaware of the full weight of the quest before him, accepted the challenge. In doing so, he unknowingly set into motion a series of events that would define his legacy and fulfill the ancient prophecy. Thus, the hero's journey began, not with a grand battle or a shining moment of glory, but with the quiet call of destiny, urging Perseus to venture into the unknown. With the gods watching over him, Perseus set forth on a path that would lead him to confront monsters, defy the impossible, and, ultimately, face the very prophecy that had followed him from birth. In the coming chapters of his journey, Perseus would prove that even the most unlikely hero, born under the shadow of fate, could rise to meet the challenges of the gods and leave his mark upon the world. The prophecy had been spoken, and its weight hung heavily over the kingdom of Argos. King Acrisius, struck with a fear that would shape his every decision, saw the birth of Perseus not as a moment of joy, but as a looming shadow, a harbinger of death. His own daughter, Danae, had borne a child who would one day bring about his demise, the oracle had said. So, in his desperate attempt to thwart the prophecy, Acrisius sought to rid himself of the infant Perseus, to cast him away as if he were a mere pebble to be tossed aside. In his palace, Acrisius stewed over the words of the oracle. He had already locked Danae away in a bronze chamber to protect her from the world. But now that Perseus was born, even that precaution seemed insufficient. In a final, cruel act, Acrisius decided to cast mother and child into the sea, hoping that the waters would claim them and, with them, any chance of the prophecy being fulfilled. The chest that would carry Perseus and Danae was crafted with care, not for safety, but to ensure their doom. Sealed tightly, the wooden box was left to drift upon the waves as Acrisius watched, heart heavy with hope and guilt. The king believed that the sea would swallow them whole, never to be seen again. But the sea, ever mercurial and vast, had other plans. As the chest bobbed and drifted across the deep, dark waters, its course seemed guided by forces beyond mortal comprehension. It carried Perseus and his mother far from the shores of Argos, past distant lands and treacherous seas, to the island of Seriphos. Seriphos, a quiet and remote island, lay far from the bustling cities of Greece, a place where fate could weave its threads unnoticed. It was here, on the rocky shores of the island, that the chest came to rest. No storm had claimed it, no monster had sunk it. Perseus and Danae had been delivered, not by chance, but by the invisible hands of the gods. The fisherman Dictys, a humble and kind man, was the one who discovered the chest as he cast his nets. Seeing the strange object wash ashore, he approached it with curiosity and care. Upon opening the chest, he found Danae, exhausted and distraught, but alive, and her infant son, who seemed to be sleeping peacefully. The sight of the child stirred something in Dictys, a sense of wonder and duty. He could not abandon them. Dictys took the pair into his humble home and cared for them as best he could. He offered them shelter and safety, not knowing the greatness that lay within the child he had found. Perseus, though still a baby, was already marked by destiny, for the gods had willed it that he should survive and flourish, even in the face of such an unnatural beginning. In the warmth of Dictys's cottage, Perseus grew, his strength and courage quietly developing under the watchful eyes of the gods. He lived a peaceful life, unaware of the shadows of the past that hung over his family, unaware of the prophecy that had nearly taken his life before it had truly begun. In the company of Dictys and his wife, Perseus learned the simple joys of childhood, far from the grandeur and conflict that awaited him in the future. But even in the safety of Seriphos, Perseus could not escape the forces of fate. The island, though tranquil, was ruled by Polydectes, the king who had taken Danae into his care. Polydectes was not the kind and gentle man that Dictys was. Though he treated Danae with courtesy, his intentions were far from honourable. His affection for her was laced with desire, and he saw Perseus, still a child, as an obstacle to his own ambitions. Polydectes, feeling the need to rid himself of the young Perseus, began to plot. He knew that Danae would not easily be swayed by his advances, while her son was near. And so Polydectes devised a plan, one that would see Perseus out of the way, leaving him free to pursue Danae without interference. The king announced a grand feast, and he called upon all the island's men to bring gifts in celebration. In his eyes, the perfect gift was one that could prove great courage and valor. It was here, in this moment of deception, that Polydectes would present Perseus with a seemingly impossible task, a challenge that would either rid him of the young hero or set the stage for Perseus's remarkable rise. Polydectes, with a sly smile, requested of Perseus that he bring him the head of Medusa, the Gorgon. Medusa, whose gaze turned men to stone with but a glance, was the most fearsome creature in all the world. She was a being of great power, cursed by Athena to bear snakes for hair, her very presence a death sentence for those who dared to meet her eye. In asking Perseus to fetch Medusa's head, Polydectes believed he had devised an impossible task, one from which the young man would surely never return. It was the perfect solution to the problem of Perseus's presence in his life. Yet Polydectes underestimated the will of the gods and the strength that lay dormant within Perseus. This request, seemingly simple, would change the course of Perseus's life forever. Though he was still young and untested, Perseus did not shrink from the challenge. Instead, he accepted the task without hesitation, unaware that his acceptance would mark the beginning of his journey into legend. Thus, Perseus set out on a quest that would carry him far from the shores of Seriphos into lands unknown and perilous. With Medusa's head as his prize, he would confront dangers that would test not only his strength, but his very will to survive. The prophecy, which had loomed over his birth, now set its sights on his future. The road ahead was fraught with danger, yet Perseus was destined to walk it, step by step, toward the fulfillment of a fate that was as inescapable as the sea's eternal waves. The island of Seriphos, a quiet place where the winds of fate seemed to blow gently, became the unexpected cradle of Perseus's early years. There, far from the conflicts of kings and the shadow of prophecy, Perseus and his mother, Danae, were given a new chance at life, though their past was never far behind them. The chest that had carried them across the seas had been a vessel of fear and uncertainty, but now, in the hands of Dictys, a humble fisherman, it became a symbol of salvation. Dictys, upon finding the chest, had no way of knowing the great destiny that lay within it. He was, after all, just a man of simple means, casting his nets into the ocean in the hope of a good catch, as he had done for many years. But fate, as it often does, intervened in ways unseen. When Dictys opened the chest to find Danae and Perseus inside, his heart was filled with compassion. He could not bear to leave them, nor would he allow harm to come to them. In a world where the lives of mortals were often shaped by the whims of the gods, Dictys's kindness became an anchor, steady and unshakable. Danae, weary from the trials of the past, found in Dictys not just a protector, but a friend. Though she was a woman of royal blood, her life had been turned upside down by the cruelty of her father and the divine intervention of Zeus. She had been cast away once, her fate uncertain, but now, in the safety of Dictys's care, she began to heal. There was no more fear of her father's wrath, no more threats of being cast aside. In the warmth of the fisherman's home, Perseus grew, though still unaware of the larger forces that shaped his destiny. His days were filled with the simplicity of childhood, the sound of the waves on the shore, the warmth of the sun on his skin, and the laughter that echoed through Dictys's small cottage. The boy grew strong and healthy, his body reflecting the divine blood that ran through his veins. But he knew not yet the weight of the prophecy or the danger that still loomed over him. As Perseus played with the children of Seriphos, his spirit was light, unburdened by the knowledge of the challenges ahead. The gods, it seemed, had given him a moment of peace, an interlude between the turbulence of the world and the fate that would one day pull him into the realm of legend. But such moments of quiet peace never last long in Greek mythology, for even the most seemingly peaceful places are subject to the tides of fate. It was not long before Perseus's presence on Seriphos began to draw attention. King Polydectes, the ruler of the island, had already begun to grow restless. Polydectes had been the one to take Danae and her son into his care after their arrival, but the king's care was not without his own desires. Polydectes had fallen in love with Danae, and though he had never made his feelings known, he could not ignore the fact that Perseus, a young and strong man, stood between him and the woman he sought. Danae, still reeling from the pain of her past, was not interested in Polydectes' advances. She had no desire to wed again, least of all to a man who had taken her in only because of his own selfish ambitions. But Polydectes, seeing Danae's resistance, grew frustrated. The presence of Perseus was an obstacle, and in his mind, the only way to remove that obstacle was to send Perseus away. Thus, the king devised a plan, one that would rid him of Perseus without bloodshed or direct confrontation. He would send the young man on a quest, an impossible quest. Polydectes knew that the mortal hero would never survive the task he set for him, and with Perseus out of the way, he would be free to pursue Danae without interference. The king called for a great feast, gathering the men of Seriphos in celebration. At the feast, he asked for gifts, knowing that Perseus, eager to prove himself, would rise to the occasion. Polydectes knew the perfect challenge. He asked Perseus for the head of Medusa, one of the most terrifying creatures in all the world. Medusa's gaze could turn men to stone with a single glance, and her power was unmatched by anything Perseus had ever encountered. Polydectes' request was not made with the intention of helping Perseus prove his worth. Rather, it was a trap, a way to rid himself of the young hero. In his mind, the task was so impossible that Perseus would never return, and the king would be rid of him for good. But Perseus, in his youth and naivety, did not hesitate. Without understanding the full danger of the task, he accepted the challenge. He did not know that by agreeing to seek Medusa's head, he was stepping into the very hands of fate, beginning a journey that would carry him far from the shores of Seriphos to places unknown and perilous. As Perseus stood before Polydectes, pledging to retrieve the head of Medusa, a quiet determination filled him. His blood, divine and mortal, stirred within him, awakening the hero who would one day shape the course of history. And though the gods watched over him from the heavens, it was Perseus's own courage and will that would carry him forward, step by step, toward a future no mortal could have imagined. As the night of the feast fell away into the quiet of dawn, Perseus prepared to set out on a journey that would test him in ways he could not yet understand. With his mind set on the impossible task ahead, he did not know that the gods would soon come to his aid, offering gifts that would help him succeed where others had failed. Thus, the hero's quest began, not with the clashing of swords or the roar of battle, but with a simple decision to step forward, to accept the challenge laid before him, and to follow the call of destiny wherever it might lead. As the days passed on Seriphos, a quiet tension hung over the island. King Polydectes, though appearing kind and generous on the surface, was growing increasingly impatient. His desire for Danae, Perseus's mother, was no secret, and with each passing day he saw the young man as a growing obstacle between him and his goal. Despite his outward affability, Polydectes had no intention of simply courting Danae. He intended to rid himself of Perseus once and for all, and to do so he needed to set in motion a series of events that would lead the young hero to a perilous and, as he believed, impossible quest. Thus, Polydectes conceived his plan. He would use Perseus's youthful enthusiasm and sense of duty to send him away on a mission that no mortal could survive. At a grand feast held in the heart of the island, Polydectes called upon all the men of Seriphos, gathering them for a celebration. The king's request, seemingly innocent and full of good cheer, would soon reveal itself to be a trap. At the feast, Polydectes made a public request of his guests. He asked each of the men to bring a gift, something worthy of a great king, a token of admiration and respect. To this, Perseus, with his heart full of youthful pride, immediately offered his own pledge. Whatever Polydectes desired, he would provide. The king's face lit with a sly smile as he saw the opportunity to rid himself of the young man. Polydectes knew that Perseus, eager to prove his worth and show his courage, would take the request to heart. And so, he set the stage for what would be the most dangerous challenge Perseus would face in his entire life. In front of all those gathered, Polydectes declared that he wished for a gift so rare, so extraordinary, that only a true hero could procure it. His request was a treasure of the gods themselves, a gift that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The head of Medusa, the Gorgon. Medusa was a creature of fearsome power, cursed by Athena herself. Once a beautiful maiden, Medusa had been transformed into a monster whose very gaze could turn men to stone. Her hair was a writhing mass of serpents, and her eyes were as deadly as any weapon. She and her two sisters, the Gorgons, lived in a far-off land beyond the reaches of mortal men, in a place where darkness reigned and the air was thick with the stench of death. To seek her out and return with her head was a feat that had never been accomplished, and Polydectes knew this well. Perseus, with a heart full of courage and perhaps some youthful naivety, did not hesitate. With an unwavering sense of duty, he agreed to the impossible task. He did not know the true danger that lay ahead, nor did he fully understand the terrible power of Medusa. But his promise was made, and in his mind there was no turning back. The gods, in their wisdom, had set this path before him, and he would follow it, even if it led him into the heart of darkness. Polydectes, watching with a self-satisfied smile, had no doubt that Perseus would fail. He believed the quest was far too dangerous, far too impossible for any mortal to survive. In his mind, the task was a way to rid himself of the boy once and for all. Perseus, though brave, was only human, and Polydectes was certain that no mortal man could face the Gorgon and live. But what Polydectes could not know, what he could not foresee, was the quiet intervention of the gods. For even as Perseus's fate seemed sealed, the will of the divine was already at work. In the days that followed, the gods would come to Perseus's aid, offering him tools and gifts that would help him succeed where others had failed. The first to come to Perseus was the goddess Athena, wise and ever watchful. She appeared to him in a vision, guiding him on the path to Medusa. Athena, who had once cursed Medusa, now sought to help Perseus in his quest. She bestowed upon him a polished shield, shining and bright, which would reflect the deadly gaze of Medusa. Athena instructed Perseus to use the shield as a mirror, so that he could avoid looking directly at Medusa's eyes. The shield, reflecting Medusa's form, would allow Perseus to strike her down without falling victim to her deadly stare. Next came Hermes, the messenger god, whose swift feet carried him across the skies. He gave Perseus a pair of winged sandals, magical footwear that would allow the young hero to fly. With these sandals, Perseus would be able to travel swiftly across the land, reaching the distant and dangerous home of the Gorgons. But the gifts did not stop there. Hermes also gave Perseus the Helm of Invisibility, a powerful artifact that would make him unseen by his enemies. With this helmet, Perseus could approach Medusa without being detected, giving him the element of surprise. Finally, the nymphs of the north, who lived near the edge of the world, provided Perseus with a satchel to carry Medusa's head safely so that he could transport it without succumbing to its deadly power. These gifts, each divine, each imbued with the power of the gods, were the tools that would make Perseus's impossible task achievable. With these gifts in hand, Perseus set forth on his journey, determined to fulfill the impossible request made by Polydectes. But even as he prepared to face the Gorgon, a quiet understanding grew within him. The gods were with him, and their favor would guide his steps. As Perseus left the safety of Seriphos, his journey had only just begun. The road ahead was filled with dangers, but it was also one of purpose. He would confront the impossible, face the terror that lay beyond the edges of the world, and return with the head of Medusa. This quest, seemingly driven by a king's deceit, was in fact the very beginning of Perseus's transformation from a young, naive man into a hero whose name would be remembered for eternity. Medusa's name was whispered in fear across the lands. The story of her transformation from a beautiful maiden to a creature of nightmare was one that the people of Greece knew all too well, for it was tied to the wrath of Athena, one of the most powerful and revered goddesses. Medusa had once been a woman of extraordinary beauty, a mortal priestess who had served in Athena's temple. She had hair that shone like gold in the sunlight, and her face was said to be so enchanting that even the gods were drawn to her. But beauty in the world of the gods could often be a curse. Medusa's beauty caught the eye of Poseidon, the god of the sea, and he desired her. It was said that in Athena's temple, Poseidon's love for Medusa was so strong that he violated her, and it was this act that would change Medusa's life forever. Athena, furious with her priestess for defiling her temple, cursed Medusa. She transformed her hair into a writhing mass of snakes, and her once beautiful face became a grotesque visage of terror. Medusa's gaze, once filled with allure, became her greatest weapon. Anyone who met her eyes would be turned to stone, trapped forever in an eternal, lifeless form. The beauty that had once been a gift became a deadly curse, and Medusa, now a Gorgon, was forced to live in exile with her two sisters, Stheno and Euryale. They dwelled in the farthest reaches of the world, beyond the edges of civilization, in a land where no mortal dared to venture. The tale of Medusa, as tragic as it was terrifying, was known to all who had heard the whispers of the gods. Her curse was seen as both a warning and a punishment. To look upon the divine was to risk losing oneself forever. But it was not just Medusa's story that fascinated and terrified mortals. It was the fear of her gaze that held power over the hearts of all who heard her name. The very thought of meeting her eyes sent chills down the spine, for to do so was to face a fate worse than death. For Perseus, this story was not just myth. It was now his mission. The young hero had accepted the challenge laid before him by Polydectes to bring back Medusa's head. In doing so, he was not only accepting a dangerous quest, but also walking directly into the path of a monster whose very existence defied the natural order. Medusa's death would not be an ordinary triumph, nor would it be a simple victory over a monstrous foe. It was a challenge that tested the very limits of what a hero could endure. To approach Medusa, Perseus would need more than just bravery. He would need the gifts of the gods, and above all, he would need to be clever. For the power of Medusa lay not just in her form, but in the curse that accompanied her presence, the deadly gaze that turned everything to stone. Perseus had already been given the first key to his success, Athena's polished shield. The goddess had instructed him to use the shield as a mirror, allowing him to view Medusa's reflection without directly gazing into her eyes. This would be the key to avoiding her deadly curse. With the shield, Perseus could face the Gorgon without succumbing to the paralyzing power of her gaze. It was a gift of wisdom, and it would prove to be the difference between life and death. But the shield was not the only tool Perseus would need. His journey to Medusa's lair was fraught with dangers, and the road to reach her would be long and treacherous. Perseus had no map to guide him, no clear sense of where Medusa dwelled. His only hope was the guidance of the gods, and it was through their gifts that he would find his way. Hermes, the swift messenger god, had given Perseus the winged sandals that would allow him to fly. These sandals would carry him across great distances, over treacherous lands, and into the very heart of the Gorgon's domain. The sandals would grant him the speed he needed to escape the dangers of Medusa's sisters, who were said to guard her resting place, and they would carry him closer to the monster herself. And yet, even with these gifts, Perseus was still stepping into a world of nightmares. The Gorgons, though monstrous, were not entirely without some form of human understanding. Their home, hidden in the far reaches of the world, was a place of shadows and silence. Here, the very air was thick with the stench of death, and every corner seemed to whisper of doom. As Perseus set out on his journey, he could not help but feel the weight of the task ahead. His heart, though filled with the courage of a hero, was heavy with the knowledge of what he was about to face. The prophecy of Medusa, the curse of her gaze, and the legends of those who had tried and failed to defeat her, all of these weighed on his mind. He had heard the stories of brave men who had gone to face the Gorgons, only to return as statues, their bodies forever frozen in the moment of their demise. Yet Perseus did not falter. He had been given the tools to succeed, and the gods had placed their trust in him. With the shield in hand, the sandals on his feet, and the helm of invisibility at his side, Perseus embarked on a journey into the unknown. He would travel to the edge of the world, where the Gorgons dwelled in their lair of darkness. His task was clear: to confront Medusa, to defeat her, and to return with her head. The hero's journey had begun in earnest, and though the path before him was fraught with danger, Perseus's heart was resolute. With the gods' gifts in hand, Perseus set out on the long and treacherous journey to find the Gorgons, where Medusa lay in wait. The road was far from clear, for the Gorgons lived in a place where few mortals dared to tread. It was a land of darkness, beyond the reach of the known world, hidden away in the remote edges of the earth. It was said to be a place where the very air seemed to turn to stone, where the skies were eternally overcast, and where only the bravest or the most foolish would venture. Perseus, despite the weight of his task, moved forward with resolve. His heart burned with the desire to prove himself, but his mind was also sharp, for he knew that the gods had set him on a path of great danger. He was not a fool, and he knew that failure would not only cost him his life, but it would also fulfill the prophecy that had haunted his family. This quest was not just a matter of honor, but of fate itself. The first part of Perseus's journey took him to the edge of the known world, where the land grew increasingly unfamiliar, and the air became thick with the scent of salt and seaweed. It was here that Perseus encountered his first obstacle: the Grey Sisters, ancient beings who shared one eye and one tooth between them. These three hags, whose names were Dano, Enyo, and Pemphredo, were feared even by the gods. They were the keepers of secrets, the ones who knew the way to the Gorgons' lair. Perseus approached the Grey Sisters cautiously, for he knew their powers could be deadly. The sisters, blind yet all-knowing, were able to sense the presence of any being who came near, despite their lack of sight. As Perseus drew closer, they turned their heads toward him, their expressions twisted in a mix of curiosity and malice. But Perseus, who had been taught by Athena to think quickly, did not hesitate. He approached them with a calm demeanor and a quiet voice, asking for the way to the Gorgons' home. The Grey Sisters, seeing a young man who dared to challenge them, were intrigued by his audacity. Perseus knew that they could not be reasoned with, and so he resorted to trickery. He waited for the right moment, and when the sisters passed their single eye to one another, he seized the opportunity. With a swift motion, Perseus snatched the eye from the Grey Sisters' grasp, holding it high above his head. The three hags howled in fury, their voices filled with rage, but Perseus held firm, refusing to give the eye back until they told him what he needed to know. They were bound by their own rules, and though they were ancient and powerful, they could not defy him. Finally, they agreed to reveal the location of the Gorgons' lair, deep in the land of night, beyond the Oceanus River. The sisters, having lost their eye, were left helpless. Perseus, now armed with the knowledge he needed, continued on his way. With the Grey Sisters no longer able to hinder him, he made his way toward the edge of the world, where the boundaries between the living and the dead seemed to blur. The land grew darker, more forbidding, and Perseus could feel the weight of the journey pressing upon him. The closer he drew to the Gorgons, the more he could sense their presence, like a distant echo of something ancient and terrible. The winged sandals given to him by Hermes allowed Perseus to travel quickly, soaring above the ground and skimming across the surface of the seas. The winds were his companions, and the air rushed past him as he moved further into the unknown. As he flew, he could not help but think of his mother, Danae, and the kingdom he had left behind. He thought of Polydectes and the deceitful request that had set him on this path. But there was no time for regret or reflection. The mission was clear. He had to face Medusa, to confront her gaze, and to bring her head back to Seriphos. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of flight, Perseus reached the land where the Gorgons lived. It was a desolate place, barren and lifeless, where no birds sang and no trees grew. The sky was a dull, oppressive grey, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. This was a land of death, a land where even the gods dared not venture. It was a place where the echoes of those who had come before Perseus seemed to linger in the silence. Perseus knew he was close now. He could feel the presence of the Gorgons, their power looming just beyond the horizon. His heart beat faster, not with fear, but with the sharpness of purpose. He knew that he had no choice but to succeed. To fail would mean his own death and the fulfillment of the prophecy that had haunted his family for so long. As Perseus flew over the land, he saw them, the Gorgons. They were not merely monsters, but creatures of ancient and terrible power. Medusa, the Bartikt, most beautiful and deadly of them all, lay among the other two sisters, Stheno and Euryale. Their bodies were twisted and grotesque, their faces a grotesque mask of snakes and stone. Their eyes, when they opened, could turn any living creature to stone, and the very sight of them was enough to send chills down the spine of even the bravest hero. Medusa, however, was different from her sisters. She was alone now, her sisters far from her lair, and it was she who Perseus would face. Though she was a creature of terror, Perseus could not help but feel a strange pity for her. She was, after all, once a beautiful woman, a woman whose fate had been twisted by the anger of the gods. But there was no time for pity. Perseus had a task to complete, and the time had come for him to confront the creature who had once been a victim of the gods' wrath. With the shield held high, Perseus readied himself for the final confrontation. He would face Medusa not with his eyes, but with the reflection of her deadly gaze. With his gifts in hand, he prepared to strike, knowing that the fate of his family and the future of his kingdom rested on his success. The land before Perseus was a place of silence, a stillness that weighed heavily on his heart. The sky overhead was a dull, lifeless grey, as if even the heavens themselves had recoiled from the terror that dwelled in the land below. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to absorb all sound, creating an eerie, unnatural silence. It was as though time itself had slowed to a halt, and Perseus could feel the weight of the moment bearing down upon him. He hovered above the desolate landscape, his winged sandals carrying him closer and closer to the lair of the Gorgons. Below him, the stone forms of creatures long turned to statues littered the ground. These were the victims of Medusa's gaze, once men, once heroes, turned to lifeless stone by a single glance. Their faces, frozen in terror, seemed to plead for mercy, but there was no mercy to be found in this cursed place. Perseus's heart raced, but not with fear. He had come too far to turn back now. The prophecy, which had haunted his family for so long, had led him here. It was not just Medusa he sought, but the very fulfillment of his fate. And though the task ahead was perilous, though he faced a creature of terrifying power, Perseus was resolute. He would not fail. Through the gloom of the land, Perseus saw them, the Gorgons. They lay in wait, their bodies twisted into grotesque forms, half human, half monster. Their eyes were closed, but Perseus knew that they could open them at any moment, and that to meet their gaze would mean certain death. Sthano and Euryale, the two other Gorgons, were there, but it was Medusa who drew his attention, for it was she whom he had come to defeat. Medusa lay apart from her sisters, her snakes writhing in a tangle of fury. Unlike the others, who were cruel and relentless, Medusa seemed a creature caught between the remnants of her humanity and the monster she had become. Her hair, once golden and beautiful, was now a mass of serpents, each one hissing and snapping in the air. Her face, once full of grace, was now a mask of horror, her eyes still closed, her body tense with the weight of her curse. Perseus, hovering above her, knew that this was his moment. He had been given the shield of Athena, the gift that would allow him to face Medusa without falling victim to her deadly gaze. The shield, polished to a mirror-like shine, would reflect Medusa's image, allowing Perseus to strike without ever having to look into her eyes directly. The gods had guided him this far, but now it was up to him to finish the task. His grip tightened on the shield and the sword given to him by Hermes. The blade was sharp, forged by the gods themselves, and it glinted in the muted light. Perseus's fingers brushed against the sword's hilt, and for a moment he closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his destiny settle around him. This was no ordinary battle. It was a fight for his future, for the future of his family, and for the very soul of his kingdom. Medusa's sisters, Sthano and Euryale, lay still and silent, their eyes closed in a perpetual slumber. They were dangerous, but it was Medusa who posed the greatest threat. Perseus knew that the key to his success was in using the shield as a mirror. If he were to face Medusa directly, even with the gods' gifts, he would be lost. Slowly, carefully, he angled the shield so that Medusa's reflection appeared before him. Through the mirror of the shield, he could see her, her body coiled in an unnatural stillness, her snakes writhing in the air around her head. Her eyes remained closed, and for a moment Perseus hesitated. He could feel the heavy weight of her presence, as if the very air around him was charged with the power of her curse. But there was no time for hesitation. Perseus knew that the moment he hesitated, the Gorgon would awaken to her deadly power. With swift precision, he moved forward, stepping carefully over the stone statues that littered the ground. His eyes remained fixed on the reflection in the shield, never once allowing his gaze to fall upon Medusa's real form. He moved as silently as the wind, his heart steady, his breath shallow. As Perseus approached Medusa, his sword raised high, the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift. The stillness of the land was broken, as if the earth itself had felt the tension building in the air. His pulse quickened, but he did not falter. He had trained for this moment, had prepared his whole life for this task. He had been given the tools of the gods, and now it was his turn to use them. With one swift motion, Perseus struck. The sword, glowing with divine light, cut through the air and came down upon Medusa's neck. The moment of contact was swift and brutal. Medusa's head fell from her shoulders, her body twitching in the final throes of life. The snakes that had once wriggled in her hair fell still, and for the first time in an eternity there was silence. Medusa's head rolled to the ground, her eyes still closed in a final deadly peace. Perseus stood above her, the sword still raised, the weight of what he had just done settling in his chest. He had completed the task, the impossible task set before him by Polydectes. He had defeated the Gorgon, the creature whose very gaze had turned countless heroes to stone. But despite the triumph, a strange feeling lingered in Perseus's heart. Medusa's death was not just the slaying of a monster, it was the end of a tragedy. She had once been a beautiful woman, a victim of the gods' cruel whims. And though she had become a terror, part of Perseus could not help but feel the weight of her fate. She was a creature of both victim and villain, and in her death, Perseus saw the tragic consequences of the gods' interference in mortal lives. With Medusa's head now severed from her body, Perseus took it up, placing it carefully in the magical satchel provided by the nymphs. The power of the Gorgon's gaze would be contained, and Perseus could now return to Seriphos, having fulfilled his task. But the journey was far from over. With Medusa's head securely placed in the enchanted satchel, Perseus stood in the midst of the desolate land where he had faced the Gorgon. The silence around him seemed more profound than before, as if the world itself was holding its breath in the wake of his victory. The sky remained a dull grey, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to resist his every step, as if reluctant to let him leave. But Perseus had completed his task. The monster's head, now severed and safely contained, was a powerful trophy, but it also weighed heavily in his hands. The journey to reach this point had been long and perilous, but it was not yet over. The return journey would test him just as much as the path to the Gorgons had. Perseus could not linger. He knew that Polydectes would be expecting him to return, and the island of Seriphos lay far to the south. But the road home was not a simple one. Perseus had already faced monsters and trials, but the gods had made it clear that the hero's journey was never meant to be easy. The fates had a way of leading their champions into further challenges, and the path back to Seriphos would be no different. As Perseus prepared to leave the land of the Gorgons, he was reminded once again of the divine gifts that had been bestowed upon him. His winged sandals, given by Hermes, would carry him swiftly through the air, allowing him to fly back to Seriphos with speed. But it was not the journey that concerned him. It was what he would face along the way. Perseus turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the seas beckoned him. The winds, though calm at the moment, could change at any time, and the gods were known to interfere in the fates of heroes. But it was not the weather that weighed on his mind. There was a deeper, more personal concern, a sense of unfinished business. Though he had accomplished what seemed impossible, he knew that Polydectes was still waiting for him in Seriphos. The king had no idea what awaited him upon Perseus's return. As Perseus set out on his journey home, the familiar landscape of the sea stretched before him, the waters calm and silent. But even the quiet was deceptive, for the seas were not always as peaceful as they appeared. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, and Perseus had already learned that the gods often used heroes as pawns in their larger plans. It was during his flight across the sea that Perseus encountered the first of these obstacles. As he soared above the waves, he came across an island where a terrible creature, the sea monster Cetus, was terrorizing the people of the land. This creature, with its massive size and hunger for human flesh, was as much a force of nature as a monster. Its body was like that of a serpent, its head enormous and filled with sharp, jagged teeth. The people of the island, who had no hope of defeating such a beast, were on the verge of despair. Cetus had been sent by Poseidon, the god of the sea, to ravage the land. The monster had been sent to punish the people, for their king, Perseus, had angered the gods by failing to offer proper sacrifices. But now, with the people helpless and the kingdom in ruins, they turned to Perseus for salvation. Without hesitation, Perseus descended from the sky, his sandals carrying him swiftly toward the island. The people, seeing the hero approach, called out for help, and Perseus, though weary from his journey, could not ignore their pleas. He had already faced one monstrous creature, and though Cetus was no less terrifying, Perseus knew that this was another test set before him by the gods. He readied himself for the fight, knowing that the key to defeating Cetus was not just strength, but strategy. With his sword drawn, Perseus used his wits to outmaneuver the creature, avoiding its deadly jaws. He circled around Cetus, waiting for the right moment to strike. The monster thrashed in the waters, sending waves crashing against the shore, but Perseus was quick and sure-footed. At last, with a swift and precise blow, Perseus drove his sword into the creature's heart. Cetus let out a terrible cry before collapsing, its massive body sinking beneath the waves. The people of the island cheered in triumph, and Perseus, though exhausted, felt a sense of satisfaction. Once again he had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. But even in victory, he knew that his journey was far from complete. The sea, though calm for the moment, held other challenges. As Perseus continued his flight toward Seriphos, the skies began to darken and the winds picked up. There was no telling what might await him on the horizon, but Perseus was undeterred. His courage had been forged in the fires of adversity, and though the gods had guided him, it was his own strength that had carried him through. With the head of Medusa in his satchel, the hero continued his journey home. He had faced monsters, trickery, and impossible odds, and yet his resolve had not faltered. The weight of the gods' gifts, both the blessings and the burdens, was heavy upon him, but Perseus was a hero. He had been shaped by trials, and now he was returning to Seriphos to fulfill the final part of his destiny. And as he flew toward the horizon, Perseus knew that his journey would not be over until he had confronted Polydectes, the man who had set him on this path. The king's deceit would soon be exposed, and Perseus would return not just as a hero, but as the man who had triumphed over fate itself. The island of Seriphos, with its soft winds and quiet shores, was a place of deceptive peace. To the untrained eye, it was an idyllic setting, where life continued at a steady rhythm, undisturbed by the chaotic events of the world beyond. Yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension swirled. Polydectes, the king of the island, had long awaited Perseus's return, unaware of the hero's victory. In his mind, Perseus's death was all but assured, and with it, his own path to claiming Danae's hand would be secured. But Perseus, carrying the head of Medusa in his satchel, was not the same young man who had left Seriphos months ago. The boy who had set out with only the promise of a dangerous quest had returned as a hero, a conqueror of monsters and a bearer of the gods' favor. The journey had transformed him, not only into a man capable of achieving the impossible, but into one who understood the weight of divine intervention and mortal responsibility. As Perseus descended upon Seriphos, the people of the island marveled at the sight of him. His wings, gleaming in the light of the setting sun, carried him with an aura of authority. Yet there was no time for celebration. His mind was focused on one thing: the deceitful king who had set this quest in motion. Polydectes had played his part in the prophecy that had haunted Perseus's family, and now it was time for the king to face the consequences of his actions. Perseus made his way to the palace, where Polydectes had been preparing for his triumphant return. The king's mood had shifted from impatience to anticipation, for he had no doubt that the young hero would never return from his deadly task. When word spread that Perseus had returned, Polydectes, thinking it a cruel joke, sent for him, unaware that this would be the moment of reckoning. When Perseus entered the throne room, he found Polydectes surrounded by his court. The king's face lit up with a smile that quickly faded into confusion when he saw the hero standing before him, holding a satchel by his side. Perseus's gaze was calm but unwavering, and the air in the room seemed to shift as he approached the throne. "Ah, Perseus," Polydectes said, trying to mask his surprise with a strained grin. "I see you've returned. But where is the gift I asked for? Have you brought me Medusa's head, or have you failed as I expected?" Perseus's reply was quiet but resolute. "I have brought you the gift you requested, Polydectes." With that, he slowly and carefully reached into the satchel and withdrew the severed head of Medusa. The room fell silent. The head of Medusa, still bearing her snakes and the terrifying power of her gaze, was a sight that struck fear into the hearts of all who saw it. The very air seemed to thicken with the weight of her power, and Polydectes' face drained of color as he realized the truth. Perseus had succeeded where so many others had failed. Medusa's head was in his hands, and the gods had granted him the strength to return. Polydectes took an instinctive step back, his eyes wide with shock. He had not expected this outcome. The king, who had thought the quest a mere trick, was now confronted with the tangible proof of Perseus's success. But even in the face of the impossible, Polydectes was not one to admit defeat easily. "You cannot possibly think you can threaten me with that thing," the king stammered, though his voice trembled. "You've returned, yes, but what makes you think that I would allow you to take control of this kingdom?" Perseus did not flinch. "It is not me you need to fear, Polydectes. It is the gods themselves. You sought to deceive me, to rid yourself of me, and to claim what was not yours. You thought my death would free you, but it was your own actions that led you here." Polydectes tried to laugh, but there was no mirth in his voice. "What will you do now, hero? Will you slay me as you did the Gorgon?" he sneered, though the edge of his voice betrayed his fear. Perseus's eyes were cold but measured. "No, I do not need to kill you. You have already sealed your fate." He raised Medusa's head high, its snakes still writhing as though alive, their eyes fixed on the king. Polydectes froze, unable to look away. Though the head was no longer capable of turning men to stone in the traditional sense, the very presence of the Gorgon's head held an ancient power. As Perseus held it high, the room seemed to darken, the air growing thick with the weight of her curse. Polydectes, too terrified to move, gazed upon the head, and, in that moment, his fate was sealed. His body stiffened, his face frozen in a mask of terror, and then, like so many before him, he was turned to stone. The king, whose deceit and ambition had led to this moment, became another statue in the hall, a testament to his arrogance and hubris. The courtiers who had been present in the room, witnesses to the king's downfall, stood in stunned silence. They had seen Polydectes' reign come to an end, but they had also seen the power of Perseus, the hero who had defied the odds and returned not only with Medusa's head, but with the strength to rid the kingdom of its tyrant. Perseus took a moment to look upon the stone figure of Polydectes, but he did not gloat. His task was complete, and though he had brought justice to the island, his heart was not filled with triumph. He had done what was needed, but it had come at a cost. The journey had transformed him, and the weight of that transformation lingered in his chest. With the king's tyranny at an end, Perseus turned and left the palace, knowing that his next steps would be those of a hero, but also of a man who had seen the deeper consequences of the god's will. With Polydectes turned to stone, the oppressive reign of the king came to an abrupt and final end. Perseus stood alone in the throne room of the palace, the cold stone figure of the once tyrannical ruler, now a silent witness to his own downfall. The courtiers, who had long feared Polydectes, were left in stunned silence. The kingdom of Seriphos, once under the thumb of a cruel king, had suddenly found itself free. But the freedom that Perseus had brought was not a cause for celebration, at least not yet. His thoughts were focused on the task that remained, restoring order to a kingdom left in disarray. Seriphos had lived under the weight of Polydectes' rule for many years, and it would take more than the king's downfall to heal the wounds that had been inflicted upon the land. Perseus left the palace behind, his steps carrying him through the quiet streets of the city. The people who had once cowered in fear now looked upon him with awe. They had heard of the hero who had slain Medusa, but they had yet to fully comprehend the weight of what Perseus had achieved. To them, he was a figure of legend, both a son of the gods and a champion of justice. His presence, though quiet, commanded respect. But Perseus knew that his true task was not one of heroism in the traditional sense. He had to guide Seriphos into a new era, an era free from the tyranny of Polydectes. Perseus was not the kind of man who sought power for himself. He had never desired to rule, and it was clear to him that the people of Seriphos needed a new leader, one who would serve their interests and restore balance. He knew that the gods had given him the gifts to accomplish incredible feats, but those gifts were never meant to be used for personal gain. His purpose was to serve the greater good, not to claim a throne. The island had no true ruler now, and though Perseus could have claimed the kingship, he chose instead to restore justice in another way. He summoned the people of Seriphos to the town square, where a gathering was held to decide the future of the kingdom. Perseus spoke not as a conqueror, but as a hero who had fulfilled his quest and now sought to bring peace. He reminded the people of the virtues of fairness, compassion, and justice, and how these were the qualities they should seek in their future leader. After much discussion, the people of Seriphos, grateful for Perseus's bravery and wisdom, chose to establish a council of elders to rule in place of a single king. The council would be made up of individuals who had proven themselves in the eyes of the people, and their task would be to ensure that no one would ever again hold the power Polydectes had wielded. The kingdom would now be guided by those who represented the collective good, not by one man's greed or ambition. Perseus, though respected by all, would not remain to rule. His destiny, as he had always known, lay beyond the island of Seriphos. His journey had been a transformative one, and he could not allow himself to be bound to the kingdom for which he had risked so much. The gods had placed a greater purpose before him, and he was determined to see it through. Before he left, Perseus took a final look at the island that had been both his birthplace and the place where he had come into his own as a hero. Seriphos had once been a place of oppression, but now it was a land of hope and renewal. The council, chosen by the people, would see that it remained that way, a beacon of fairness and justice in a world that often tilted toward chaos. Perseus's heart was light as he prepared to leave the island. He had accomplished what was needed, and now it was time to move on to new challenges, new adventures. Yet, even as he prepared to take flight once more, he was mindful of what he had left behind. The kingdom that had been freed, the people who had been uplifted, and the legacy of Medusa's head that would continue to serve as a reminder of the consequences of tyranny. Before departing, Perseus sought out his mother, Danae, who had been waiting anxiously for his return. The reunion between mother and son was a quiet one, filled with unspoken relief and pride. Perseus did not seek praise for his deeds, but Danae, seeing the man her son had become, could not help but feel a deep sense of admiration. Her son had not only completed a dangerous quest, but had returned with the wisdom to change the course of a kingdom's future. "Mother," Perseus said softly, "the gods have guided me, and the journey has been long, but I must leave again. My fate lies beyond this island." Danae, though reluctant to see him go, understood. She had always known that Perseus's path would lead him far from Seriphos. She embraced him one final time, her eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. Perseus had returned as a hero, but he had also outgrown the island that had once been his home. He had become something greater than the boy who had left. With Medusa's head still in his possession, Perseus prepared to take flight. The winds of destiny were calling him, and the sky stretched wide before him, full of promise. Seriphos would remember him as a hero, but the world beyond awaited him. And so Perseus departed once more, leaving Seriphos behind, but carrying with him the wisdom, strength, and experience that would guide him into the future. His legend was far from over, and though the island had been restored, the hero's journey would continue to unfold in ways that even the gods themselves could not foresee. The winds carried Perseus far from the island of Seriphos, the place of his birth and the site of his greatest triumph. As he soared through the skies, his mind was filled with the weight of the journey he had undertaken, one that had not only transformed him from a boy into a hero, but had altered the course of his family's destiny. He had completed his quest, defeated Medusa, and returned to face the tyrant Polydectes, and in doing so, he had freed Seriphos from oppression. But Perseus's legend did not end there. Though he had left the island behind, his name would be spoken of for generations, and his deeds would become the stuff of myth. His victory over Medusa, his triumph over impossible odds, and his courage in the face of overwhelming danger had ensured his place among the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. Yet, despite his fame, Perseus remained humble, never seeking glory, but simply fulfilling the tasks set before him. As he flew through the skies, Perseus's thoughts turned toward his family, and in particular, his mother, Danae. She had waited so long for his return, and now that he had accomplished what seemed impossible, he longed to share his success with her. But his journey had not been without its consequences, and Perseus knew that there was still more for him to do, more for him to face. It was not long before Perseus's path crossed with another legend, one that would change the course of his life and the lives of many others. As he flew across the seas, he came upon the kingdom of Ethiopia, ruled by King Cepheus and his queen Cassiopeia. The kingdom was in turmoil, for a terrible monster, the sea creature Cetus, was ravaging the coast. The people of Ethiopia had been powerless to stop the beast, and in their desperation, they had turned to the gods for help. When Perseus arrived, he found the royal family in distress. Queen Cassiopeia had once boasted of her beauty, claiming that she was more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs, who were themselves revered for their grace and charm. The sea nymphs, angered by her pride, had appealed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, who had sent Cetus to punish the queen for her arrogance. King Cepheus, desperate to save his kingdom and his family, consulted an oracle who revealed that the only way to appease Poseidon and save Ethiopia was to sacrifice his daughter Andromeda to the monster. Andromeda was chained to a rock by the sea, left to face the creature alone. Her fate seemed sealed, and the people of the kingdom, though horrified, had no choice but to accept the oracle's prophecy. When Perseus arrived in Ethiopia, he learned of the princess's fate. His heart ached for Andromeda, and his sense of justice flared. Here, before him, was yet another creature of the sea, one that threatened to destroy the innocent, all because of a queen's vanity. Perseus knew what he had to do. He would save Andromeda as he had saved Seriphos and restore balance once more. With Medusa's head still in his possession, Perseus devised a plan. He would use the power of the Gorgon's gaze to defeat Cetus. The creature, like all monsters, was vulnerable to the terror that Medusa's image could instill. If Perseus could bring Medusa's head to the battle, he could defeat the monster without harm. When Perseus approached the rock where Andromeda was chained, she saw him and, like the rest, expected little more than her inevitable fate. But Perseus, with his heart full of resolve, reassured her. He spoke of his victory over Medusa and how he had the power to defeat the creature that threatened her life. He would save her, and in doing so, he would also free Ethiopia from its curse. Andromeda's eyes, though filled with fear, also held a glimmer of hope. Perseus, knowing the importance of timing, waited until Cetus appeared, rising from the depths of the sea. The monster's immense size darkened the waters, and its eyes gleamed with a hunger for destruction. Perseus, standing confidently on the shore, raised Medusa's head high. The moment the monster laid eyes upon the Gorgon's image, it froze in place, its body turning stiff with terror. The creatures of myth could not withstand the power of Medusa's gaze, and Cetus, like the others before it, turned to stone. The people of Ethiopia, who had been watching in disbelief, now burst into joyous celebration. Perseus had done the impossible once again. He had saved Andromeda, and in doing so, he had not only ended the threat of Cetus, but had brought peace to the kingdom. King Cepheus, overjoyed by the hero's courage, offered Perseus a reward, and in a moment of deep gratitude, he gave his daughter Andromeda's hand in marriage. Though Perseus had never sought fame or reward, he accepted the gift, for he had come to admire Andromeda's beauty and strength. In time they were wed, and together they brought peace and prosperity to the kingdom of Ethiopia. Their union would be celebrated for generations, and from it would come many descendants, one of whom would be the great hero Heracles, known for his own legendary feats. Thus, Perseus's journey continued to echo through the ages, his name a symbol of bravery, wisdom, and the power of the gods. His legacy would not only be remembered in the deeds he had done, but also in the bloodline that he had established. Perseus's story, a tale of triumph over monsters and the forces of fate, would endure in the annals of Greek mythology, forever intertwined with the stories of gods and heroes. And as Perseus lived out his days, his heart remained grounded in the knowledge that true heroism lay not in seeking glory, but in fulfilling one's destiny with honor, humility, and courage. Perseus's life was one marked by great deeds and even greater burdens. From his humble beginnings, trapped in a chest with his mother, to his legendary victory over Medusa and the monstrous Cetus, his name became synonymous with courage, destiny, and divine favor. His marriage to Andromeda, the princess of Ethiopia, only added another layer to the tapestry of his life, a tapestry woven with the threads of both mortal and divine influence. For years, Perseus ruled alongside his wife, Andromeda, in the kingdom of Ethiopia. They brought prosperity and peace to the land, and their union was blessed with children. Yet, despite all that he had achieved, despite the titles and rewards, the fame and admiration, Perseus could not escape the feeling that his journey was never quite complete. Like all heroes of myth, he had been touched by the gods, guided by them in ways both visible and unseen. But as his days on earth grew long, he sensed that his true end was not to come in the quiet of a king's life, but rather in a moment of divine culmination. The gods, ever watching, had long decided what that culmination would be. Perseus, like so many heroes before him, would eventually be immortalized, not through the children he had fathered, nor the lands he had ruled, but through the stars themselves. One day, as Perseus walked with Andromeda along the shores of Ethiopia, the winds grew still, and the air around them seemed to thicken, heavy with an unspoken sense of finality. He looked up to the sky, his gaze drawn to the stars that had always shone so brightly above him. Andromeda, sensing his unease, reached out to him. "What weighs upon you, my love?" she asked softly. Perseus smiled faintly, but the smile was laced with an ancient wisdom. "The time has come," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision long made. "The gods have watched over me since my birth, and I have done all that they asked of me. But now, it seems, my place is no longer on this earth." Andromeda, though sorrowful, understood. She had always known that Perseus was destined for something greater than the mortal realm. She had seen his strength, his humility, and the way the gods themselves favored him, even when the burdens of his deeds weighed heavily on his heart. It was in the nature of heroes like Perseus to transcend the mortal world, to live on in myth, long after their earthly bodies had turned to dust. As Perseus spoke, the heavens seemed to stir. The stars, which had twinkled brightly since the dawn of time, began to shift, as if in recognition of his impending departure. Andromeda's heart filled with both pride and sadness, for she knew that this moment, while inevitable, was one she could not avoid. "I will miss you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Perseus turned to her, his expression filled with love and affection. "Do not mourn me, my wife, for I will always be with you, in your heart and in the stars above. We are bound together by more than just our time on this earth." And with that, the divine will of the gods became apparent. Perseus, now at peace with his fate, closed his eyes, feeling a surge of energy from within. His body, once strong and mortal, began to fade. The air shimmered around him, and the stars above grew brighter, as though they were reaching down to claim him. Andromeda, standing by his side, watched as her husband began to ascend, lifted by the celestial forces that had always watched over him. It was not a violent or sudden departure. Rather, it was as though Perseus was being gently drawn back into the embrace of the cosmos, his spirit, his soul, his very essence, returning to the heavens from which it had come. His form became light, shimmering with the radiance of the stars themselves. As Perseus ascended, the sky seemed to open before him, a vast, dark ocean of stars stretching out into eternity. His body, now glowing with the light of the stars, was lifted higher and higher until it became one with the night sky. And then, as if guided by the hand of the gods themselves, Perseus took his place among the stars. His form was immortalized in the constellation that now bears his name, a shining symbol of the heroism, wisdom, and courage that had defined his life. Andromeda, standing below, looked up into the heavens and saw the stars twinkling brightly. But now, one of those stars shone more brightly than the rest. She knew that it was him, that it was her beloved Perseus, forever immortalized in the sky. As the years passed, the people of Ethiopia spoke of Perseus not as a king or a hero of myth, but as a constellation, a reminder that even the greatest of heroes, those touched by the gods, must one day return to the stars. His name would live on in the hearts of the people, but it would also live in the heavens, a beacon of light for all those who looked to the night sky in search of guidance. The constellation of Perseus, along with that of Andromeda, would continue to shine as a testament to their love, their heroism, and the legacy of a hero who had given everything in the service of both gods and men. It would remind future generations that even in the darkest of times there is always light to be found, and that light, like the stars, will endure forever. Perseus's story, though complete in the sense of his life on earth, did not end with his ascension to the stars. The legacy of his deeds, his strength, and his divine favor stretched far beyond his time. The people of Ethiopia, where Perseus and Andromeda had ruled with wisdom and peace, continued to remember the hero who had once walked among them. The songs sung in his honor were not just tales of his battles and victories. They were stories of a man whose heart had been as noble as his strength was fierce. The legacy of Perseus was not merely one of war and triumph, but also of humility, justice, and love. Though Perseus was now a constellation, his influence remained felt in the world below. The city of Ethiopia, once a humble kingdom ruled by Perseus and Andromeda, grew in both stature and prosperity. In time, it became a symbol of hope, a place where the ideals Perseus had embodied were upheld. His name was spoken not only in reverence, but in inspiration, a guiding force for kings and rulers who followed him. They sought to emulate his virtues, his courage in the face of impossible odds, his unwavering loyalty to those he loved, and his constant willingness to do what was right, no matter the personal cost. The star that now bore his name shone brightly above Ethiopia, an eternal beacon for all who looked to the heavens. In times of conflict or despair, the people would gaze upon the constellation of Perseus and remember that even in the darkest of times, a hero could emerge and light could be found. But Perseus's legacy was not confined to Ethiopia alone. Across the Mediterranean world, his name was known and revered. In the lands of Greece, where his story had begun, tales of his courage and his victory over the Gorgon Medusa were told again and again. He was no longer just a hero of one nation, but a hero of myth, a figure whose story transcended borders. His adventures had become timeless, as immortal as the stars themselves. The myth of Perseus, told and retold through the ages, became a touchstone for countless others who sought to understand the nature of heroism. In every retelling, his actions were cast in a new light, his story growing and evolving, yet always remaining true to its core. Perseus's tale became a symbol of the intersection between the mortal and divine, of the ways in which the gods and men could shape one another. In his story, mortals saw their own potential for greatness, and the gods saw a reflection of their own power and influence upon the world. As the centuries passed, the tale of Perseus was woven into the fabric of the mythological tradition. His deeds were catalogued by poets and historians alike, his name appearing in the works of those who sought to preserve the stories of the gods and heroes for future generations. His myth was incorporated into the great epics of antiquity, his influence present in the works of Homer, Hesiod, and others who sought to capture the spirit of ancient Greece. Yet even as Perseus's legend grew, and his image became a staple of Greek mythology, there remained a sense of quiet reverence in the way he was remembered. Unlike other heroes who might have been glorified in exaggerated terms, or whose actions were transformed into larger-than-life legends, Perseus remained humble in the eyes of those who told his story. His greatest strength was not found in his physical prowess or his divine gifts, but in his sense of duty, his ability to choose what was right, and his willingness to sacrifice for the good of others. The people of Ethiopia, though they lived in the shadow of Perseus's greatness, did not worship him as a god. Instead, they remembered him as a king who had guided them with wisdom and fairness. His reign was remembered as a time of peace and prosperity, a brief but golden period in their history. And in his absence, they continued to live by the principles he had instilled in them, the values of justice, kindness, and courage in the face of adversity. Perseus's legacy was also carried through his children. His son, Perses, would go on to rule the kingdom of Ethiopia, continuing the line of heroes that had begun with his father. Through the generations, the bloodline of Perseus would carry with it the weight of his achievements, but also the responsibility to live up to the ideals he had embodied. Each descendant of Perseus carried with them not only the weight of a heroic lineage, but the burden of ensuring that the legacy of Perseus would endure. It was a legacy that stretched far beyond the physical world, living on in the hearts of the people and in the very fabric of the stars above. The constellation of Perseus remained a symbol of this enduring legacy. For generations to come, those who gazed upon the night sky would find themselves drawn to the constellation, just as Andromeda had once been drawn to her husband. It was a quiet, constant reminder that heroes, though they may leave the world behind, are never truly gone. They live on in the stories that are told, in the lives they touched, and in the sky itself. Perseus's light would continue to shine, even as the ages passed, as an eternal reminder of what it means to be a hero, to live with honor, and to rise above the limitations of mortal life. As the years passed, the memory of Perseus transformed into something more than just a myth. It became a guiding force for generations to come, a symbol of hope and strength in times of struggle. His legacy endured not just in the constellation above, but in the hearts of those who sought to live lives of courage and integrity. Perseus's story was not just a tale of ancient Greece. It was a story that spoke to the human condition, to the ideals and values that transcend time and place. In the end, the legacy of Perseus was not one of mere heroic deeds or divine intervention. It was the legacy of a man who had lived with purpose, who had faced the challenges of both gods and monsters, and who had emerged victorious, not because of his strength alone, but because of the choices he had made. It was a legacy that would live on forever, in the stars above and in the hearts of those who would continue to tell his story for generations to come. As the centuries passed, Perseus's story continued to resonate with both mortals and gods. His deeds, though cast in the shadow of time, never faded from memory. They remained alive in the hearts of those who had heard his tale and in the skies above, where his name was etched forever in the stars. His heroism echoed through the ages, becoming a touchstone for what it meant to be a hero in a world filled with uncertainty and darkness. Though Perseus had long since ascended to the heavens, the impact of his actions lived on in the realm of mortals. The people of Ethiopia, where he had once ruled with grace and wisdom, spoke often of the hero who had saved their land from destruction and who had guided them with fairness and strength. Their reverence for him did not waver, and every generation that followed continued to honor his memory, teaching their children the stories of Perseus's triumphs, his courage, and the way he had defied the very nature of fate itself. In Greece, his tale became a central pillar of the mythic tradition. His victory over Medusa, his rescue of Andromeda, and his ascension to the stars all became key elements of a larger narrative that defined the heroic age. He was no longer just a mortal hero, but a symbol of divine favor and human potential. It was said that even the gods themselves looked to Perseus as an example of how to balance mortal ambition with the wisdom of the divine. To the gods, his bravery and humility were reminders of what they had once been, before power corrupted them and turned them into capricious, distant beings. Perseus embodied the ideal of the hero who, despite being touched by the gods, never lost his humanity. In the many temples and altars dedicated to the gods, Perseus was often included among the great heroes, though he was always placed in a category apart. For while figures like Heracles and Achilles were revered for their strength and battle prowess, Perseus was venerated for the purity of his mission. His was a quiet heroism, marked not by unyielding violence, but by wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The idea of heroism that Perseus embodied was one that would ripple throughout Greek culture for centuries. Artists, poets, and playwrights drew upon his myth, creating works that told of his adventures and immortalized his spirit. They sought not to dramatize his deeds, but to present them as a model of what was possible when one's will was aligned with the will of the gods. His story, in all its simplicity and grace, was a reminder that even the greatest of heroes did not need to seek glory for its own sake. Instead, they were driven by a sense of duty, a call to act when others would falter. Perseus became a model of quiet courage, a hero who performed feats of great bravery, not for the fame that might follow, but because he knew it was the right thing to do. The legacy of Perseus was also felt in the cultures that lay beyond the borders of Greece and Ethiopia. The reach of his myth extended to lands where Greek culture had made its mark, and there, too, his name was known. In Rome, where the stories of Greek heroes were adapted into the larger Roman mythic tradition, Perseus was embraced as one of their own. His victory over Medusa was seen as a triumph of reason over chaos, of light over darkness. The myth of Perseus was recounted in the Roman world as a tale of moral virtue, a victory not just of the body, but of the soul. In this retelling, Perseus was not merely a hero. He was a symbol of the triumph of order over the disorder that threatened the world. The influence of Perseus's myth extended beyond the classical world as well. As the years turned into centuries, the story of the hero who had once walked upon the earth and ascended to the heavens became a legend, passed down from generation to generation. In the distant future, his name would be invoked in times of great struggle, not just by the people of Greece, but by all those who looked to the stars for guidance. Perseus, the mortal who had been favored by the gods, would come to represent the potential for greatness in every person. His journey would be an enduring reminder that no matter how dark the world may seem, there is always light to be found. And like the stars above, that light would never fade. As time passed, the myth of Perseus would become a story not only of ancient Greece, but also of the enduring spirit of humanity. The hero who had once faced the impossible challenges set before him, battling monsters, defying fate, and transcending mortality, would remain a symbol for all who sought to rise above their circumstances. His legacy would live on, not just in the stars, but in the hearts and minds of those who dared to dream. In every corner of the world, Perseus would be remembered. His name would live on, not in the form of statues or monuments, but in the stories that were told, in the whispers of children who looked up at the night sky, and in the words of those who, like Perseus, chose to face the trials of life with bravery and honor. Even as the world changed and new heroes arose, the story of Perseus would remain timeless, a testament to the power of human potential and the enduring light of the stars. In the long expanse of time, Perseus's name endured not only in the realms of mythology, but in the very fabric of human culture. His story, cast into the stars, became an enduring symbol, a celestial map by which to navigate both the heavens and the soul. Though centuries passed since Perseus had walked upon the earth, his influence persisted in the lives of those who continued to be inspired by his deeds. His tale lived on as a quiet but profound reminder of the depths of human potential, courage, and the eternal connection between the mortal and the divine. As people gazed upward at the constellation that bore his name, they were reminded of the hero who had ascended, not through force, but through purpose, through choices marked by a deep sense of duty and moral clarity. To them, Perseus was not merely a figure in a distant myth. He was a guiding presence, an archetype of heroism and perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. His starry form above, glowing steadily through the ages, spoke to all who faced their own trials, small or great, with the assurance that they too could rise above. The constellation of Perseus was not just a static figure, but a living part of the cosmos. Every night, when the skies were clear, those who knew his story could trace the outline of his mythic form across the heavens. Just as Perseus had once fought to rescue Andromeda from the serpent-like monster Cetus, now his image served as a constant protector in the night sky. Each line of the constellation echoed a piece of his life, a piece of the courage that had defined him, from his quest to slay Medusa to the final ascension that marked the end of his earthly journey. The stars themselves seemed to hold within them the essence of Perseus's journey. From the constellation that now carried his name, the stars spread across the firmament, forever intertwined with the stories of heroes past. They whispered of a time when heroes were more than mere figures of myth. They were human beings who, through their actions, left an indelible mark on the world. And through this constellation, the spirit of Perseus continued to live on, not only as a hero of myth, but as a symbol of hope for all who faced adversity. In the ancient cities where the stories of the gods and heroes were passed down by oral tradition, the constellation of Perseus became a powerful tool for storytelling. Elders would gather the young, drawing their attention to the night sky, where the shining figure of Perseus could be seen. They would recount the hero's deeds, his triumph over the Gorgon, his rescue of Andromeda, and his final journey to the stars. Each retelling was an act of preservation, ensuring that the legacy of Perseus would continue to be felt for generations. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were lessons in morality, courage, and the ways in which the gods and mortals shaped one another. In these ancient communities, the constellation of Perseus was also seen as a marker of the seasons. As the stars shifted with the passage of time, the people understood that Perseus's presence in the sky was not only a reminder of the hero's eternal existence, but also a sign that the world itself was always in motion, ever changing. The constellations were believed to influence the course of human affairs, and Perseus, with his story of triumph over the impossible, was a beacon for those who sought to understand the mysteries of fate. His influence extended beyond myth and legend into practical matters of life. The Greeks, with their deep understanding of the natural world, saw Perseus's constellation as a guide. Sailors navigating the vast and often treacherous seas looked to the stars for direction. Perseus's position in the sky served as a reliable point of reference, a steady presence that could help guide ships to safety. His image, shining down from above, became a symbol of navigation, not just across the seas, but through the trials and tribulations of life itself. Perseus's courage, symbolized by his steady ascent into the stars, became a guiding principle for those who felt lost or adrift. As the centuries moved into the medieval and Renaissance periods, the legacy of Perseus began to take on new forms. In the wake of the classical era, as the ancient world gave way to new philosophies and new understandings, the story of Perseus adapted to the changing times. The Renaissance, in particular, saw a revival of interest in the classical myths. and Perseus's name became once again associated with the ideals of heroism and virtue. In the works of poets, artists, and philosophers, Perseus was no longer just a figure from a distant past. He was an archetype of human excellence, a model for those who sought to lead lives of moral integrity and courage. His myth was explored not only in literature and art, but also in the burgeoning scientific world. Astronomers, fascinated by the heavens and seeking to understand the stars, found themselves drawn to Perseus's constellation. The myth and the stars became intertwined, and the figure of Perseus took on a new life as both a historical and celestial entity. For these thinkers, Perseus was not merely a symbol of human endeavor, but also an emblem of the endless mysteries that the stars held. And still, in the modern era, Perseus's legacy continues to resonate. In the age of space exploration, where humanity looks to the stars in search of knowledge, the myth of Perseus remains as relevant as ever. His ascent to the heavens, his journey from the mortal world to the celestial realm, resonates with those who dream of reaching beyond the confines of Earth. Perseus's story is one of ambition and transcendence, a reminder that humanity has always sought to reach the stars, not just as conquerors, but as explorers, seeking to understand our place in the universe. In this sense, Perseus's myth can be seen as a metaphor for the human condition itself. His journey, both in life and in death, is one of continual striving towards something greater. And while the specifics of his myth may have been shaped by the hands of poets and historians, the core of his story remains timeless. Perseus represents the ideal of reaching beyond what is known, beyond what is expected, and striving toward the stars, whether those stars are literal or symbolic. His story encourages all who encounter it to push forward, to face the challenges ahead, and to embrace the possibility of greatness, no matter the obstacles in their path. The stars that bear his name, as constant and unchanging as they seem, continue to evolve in their significance. They are, in many ways, an eternal reminder that no matter how far we travel, whether in body or in spirit, we are always connected to the stories of those who have gone before. Perseus, through the constellations, continues to guide us, offering his light as a source of comfort, hope, and inspiration. As the ages unfolded and the stories of ancient Greece faded into the pages of history, the memory of Perseus remained steadfast, quietly enduring through the millennia. His life, so intricately woven into the fabric of myth, continued to influence those who sought understanding, those who looked to the stars, and those who yearned for a glimpse of heroism in a world filled with uncertainty. His tale, though set in an ancient time, became a beacon for all ages, a reminder of the potential that lies within every individual, regardless of the era. In the quiet corners of libraries, in the halls of academia, and in the minds of poets and philosophers, the myth of Perseus was preserved. His name echoed in the words of scholars who marveled at the hero's many virtues, his bravery, his intelligence, and his undying sense of duty. Perseus was more than just a figure of myth. He was a symbol of the universal themes that resonated with every generation. The struggle between good and evil, the tension between fate and free will, the challenges of both the mortal and the divine. His story transcended time, remaining as relevant in the modern world as it had been in the age of Homer. In the modern era, when people speak of Perseus, they are no longer just telling an ancient story. They are drawing upon a legend that has transcended its roots in Greek mythology, a legend that speaks to the human condition itself. Perseus's journey, from the moment he was cast into the chest with his mother Danae to his eventual ascension to the stars, mirrors the journey of humanity itself. It is a story of struggle, of trials, and of transformation, showing that even in the face of impossible odds, greatness is possible. Perseus's legacy, though rooted in myth, found new life in the world of art and culture. Artists throughout history, painters, sculptors, and filmmakers, have looked to Perseus for inspiration. His battles with the monstrous Medusa, his rescue of Andromeda, and his ultimate ascension to the stars have provided rich material for visual storytelling. In the classical works of the Renaissance, he was portrayed as the very image of the heroic ideal, a strong, noble figure who transcended the mortal world. His image, often depicted in sculptures and paintings, conveyed not just physical strength, but also the inner fortitude required to face overwhelming challenges. Perseus was immortalized, not just in myth, but in the artistry of those who wished to capture the spirit of his story for future generations. In the world of literature, the story of Perseus found its place among the greatest of myths. Writers have long turned to the tale of Perseus for inspiration, adapting and reinterpreting his journey for new audiences. His victory over Medusa has served as a metaphor for overcoming fear and facing one's deepest challenges. The image of Perseus standing victorious over the slain Medusa became a symbol of triumph, not just over monsters, but over the darker aspects of the human psyche, our fears, our doubts, and the struggles that arise when faced with the unknown. But Perseus's story is not solely one of battle and conquest. It is also a story of compassion, of love, and of sacrifice. His relationship with Andromeda, who was saved from certain death, embodies the power of selflessness and devotion. Perseus did not seek glory for his own sake. Rather, his heroism was always tied to the well-being of others. In saving Andromeda, he demonstrated that the greatest acts of heroism often involve the protection of others, and that the true measure of a hero is not found in personal achievement, but in the willingness to act for the good of others. As Perseus's myth was retold throughout history, his story began to take on a more universal quality. While his actions were undeniably heroic, his motivations were deeply human. He was a man who faced the whims of the gods, the challenge of monsters, and the weight of fate. And yet, through it all, he remained resolute. His tale became a mirror through which later generations could examine their own struggles. Perseus's courage, his wisdom, and his sense of duty spoke to those who sought to navigate the trials and tribulations of their own lives. In the vast expanse of time, Perseus's legend took on new meanings. His transformation into a constellation was seen not only as a symbol of his immortality, but as a testament to the idea that heroes never truly leave us. They live on in the stories we tell, the lessons we learn from them, and the inspiration they provide. The stars themselves became a metaphor for the eternal nature of heroism, that though the bodies of heroes may fade, their deeds continue to shine brightly in the night sky, guiding those who look up in search of guidance. In the modern era, as humanity looked to the stars once more, Perseus's ascension to the heavens became a symbol of the ever-expanding reach of human potential. With the dawn of space exploration, many saw in Perseus's rise to the stars a reflection of humanity's own quest to reach beyond the confines of Earth. The stars that once bore witness to his triumphs became a symbol of hope for future generations, an invitation to continue the search for greatness, not only in the realm of myth, but in the realm of possibility. Perseus's legacy, then, is not just about the past. It is about the future. The enduring presence of his name in the stars serves as a reminder that the struggles of one hero can become the guiding light for countless others. As the world moves forward, Perseus remains a figure whose story continues to inspire, not as a distant myth, but as a living example of what it means to be truly heroic. His tale is not bound by the past, but continues to shape the future, reminding us that no matter where we are, no matter the challenges we face, there is always a path toward heroism. And in that path, there is always light to guide the way. Throughout history, the tale of Perseus has been woven into the collective cultural memory of humanity. His legend, rich with themes of courage, divine intervention and triumph over monstrous forces, has resonated with civilizations far beyond the borders of Greece. As societies evolved, so too did the ways in which Perseus's story was remembered, interpreted, and embraced. His myth continued to inspire, influencing everything from art and literature to philosophy and religion. In ancient times, his tale spread across the Mediterranean, taking root in cities and cultures beyond Greece. The story of Perseus was told by poets and playwrights, becoming an integral part of the shared mythology of the ancient world. As Greek culture flourished in places like Rome, the story of Perseus was adapted into Roman retellings. His victory over Medusa and his subsequent adventures were seen as symbols of the virtues of strength, wisdom, and justice. In Roman art and literature, Perseus was often portrayed not only as a hero, but also as a figure whose actions reflected the moral values that were central to Roman society: valor, honor, and the protection of the weak. The spread of Greek myths, including the story of Perseus, continued during the rise of the Roman Empire. While the Romans admired the physical feats of heroes like Heracles, it was the virtues of Perseus that captured the imagination of philosophers and moralists. His story became a model of ethical behavior, an example of how a hero could be defined not just by their strength, but also by their sense of duty, their moral compass, and their ability to navigate the complexities of fate. In a world where power often ruled over virtue, Perseus stood out as a hero whose virtues were unquestioned. Perseus's influence did not end with the fall of the Roman Empire. As Europe entered the Middle Ages, the myths of antiquity continued to be preserved and reshaped. While the focus of medieval thought shifted towards religious themes and the rise of Christianity, the classical myths, including those of Perseus, remained a part of the intellectual landscape. The stories of ancient heroes were integrated into the broader context of Christian teachings, providing moral lessons that aligned with the values of faith, humility, and courage. In medieval Europe, Perseus was often depicted in illuminated manuscripts and religious texts, where his adventures were interpreted as allegories for Christian virtues. His defeat of Medusa was seen as a metaphor for the triumph of good over evil, with Perseus symbolizing the Christian knight who vanquishes sin and darkness. His rescue of Andromeda, too, was reimagined as a symbol of divine intervention and salvation. The story of Perseus was thus adapted to fit the spiritual and moral framework of the Middle Ages, and his image was reinterpreted in ways that resonated with the medieval mindset. The Renaissance, which marked a revival of classical learning and an interest in the arts of ancient Greece and Rome, brought a renewed appreciation for the figure of Perseus. During this time, the myth of Perseus was rediscovered by artists, sculptors, and thinkers who sought to reconnect with the ideals of classical antiquity. The story of Perseus was seen as a model of human achievement, a representation of the Renaissance ideals of individual excellence, virtue, and the pursuit of knowledge. His myth became intertwined with the intellectual currents of the Renaissance, influencing works of art and literature that celebrated the human form, the power of reason, and the potential for greatness in all people. One of the most enduring images from the Renaissance period is the sculpture of Perseus by the Italian artist Benvenuto Cellini. Created between 1545 and 1554, Cellini's sculpture depicts Perseus holding the severed head of Medusa, the monster whose gaze could turn anyone to stone. The statue, which stands in Florence's Loggia dei Lanzi, captures the hero's strength, courage, and grace in the moment of victory. Cellini's depiction of Perseus has become one of the most iconic representations of the hero, illustrating the Renaissance's fascination with both the heroic and the divine. The sculpture not only immortalizes the hero, but also embodies the values of the time: humanism, the celebration of human achievement, and the pursuit of perfection. In the centuries that followed, the myth of Perseus continued to resonate, finding expression in the works of poets, playwrights, and artists around the world. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as the study of mythology became a scholarly pursuit, Perseus's story was examined in a more intellectual context. His adventures were analyzed for their deeper meanings, with scholars focusing on the psychological and symbolic aspects of his journey. Perseus's battle with Medusa, for example, was seen as a confrontation with the unconscious, with Medusa representing the terrifying, unknown forces of the human psyche. In this interpretation, Perseus's triumph over Medusa was not just a physical victory, but also a symbolic one, representing the hero's ability to confront and overcome inner fears. In more modern times, Perseus has remained a figure of enduring relevance. His myth has inspired countless works of fiction, from novels and plays to films and television shows. The themes of Perseus's story, his bravery, his compassion, and his triumph over monstrous foes, continue to captivate audiences. Perseus's image has been adapted and reimagined, often taking on new forms in the hands of contemporary storytellers. In modern retellings, Perseus is often portrayed as a figure whose heroism lies not just in his strength, but also in his wisdom, his ability to make choices that align with the greater good. His legacy, though rooted in ancient myth, remains adaptable to the changing values and ideas of each new generation. Perseus's myth also continues to influence the world of art, where his image is frequently used to represent themes of triumph, transformation, and the eternal battle between good and evil. Artists continue to find inspiration in the myth of Perseus, creating new works that reflect both the timelessness of the hero's journey and the ways in which that journey can be interpreted in light of contemporary issues. From ancient Greece to modern times, the memory of Perseus has endured, shaping the cultural and intellectual landscapes of each era. His legacy is a testament to the power of myth, the way in which stories passed down through generations continue to resonate with new audiences. Perseus's story is not just one of ancient triumphs. It is a reflection of the enduring human desire to understand the complexities of heroism, to seek out the light in the darkest of times, and to rise above the challenges that fate presents. In the stars above, and in the stories we continue to tell, Perseus lives on, his heroism serving as both an inspiration and a guide for all who seek to understand what it means to be truly heroic. The enduring appeal of Perseus is not merely in his feats of strength or his divine assistance, but in the reflection of the human spirit that his myth embodies. Perseus is a hero who transcends the typical narrative of physical conquest, becoming instead a representation of the internal struggle that lies at the heart of every human journey. His tale, stretching across generations, speaks to the themes of courage, choice, and destiny, offering a window into the eternal human quest for meaning and greatness. From the moment of his birth, Perseus's story is marked by uncertainty and adversity. Cast away in a chest with his mother, Danae, by the hand of his grandfather, King Acrisius, Perseus's life begins not as a hero's birth, but as a symbol of vulnerability and fate's cruel twists. He was not born into a noble household, nor was he destined from the start to be a great ruler. His origins are humble and fraught with uncertainty, making his rise to heroism all the more powerful. The fact that Perseus, a boy born of tragic circumstances, could defy the will of the gods and the forces of nature itself, makes his heroism all the more poignant. The first step in Perseus's journey was one of survival. His mother, Danae, held the key to his future, nurturing him even in exile. Her love and determination to protect him set the stage for Perseus to rise against the odds. From his earliest years, Perseus's life was shaped by the bonds of family, love, and sacrifice. As he faced challenges, it was not only his physical strength or divine gifts that guided him, but also his sense of responsibility to protect those he loved. This sense of duty, perhaps his greatest strength, would later define him as a hero. Perseus was not merely seeking glory for himself. His deeds were often driven by a desire to protect the innocent and fulfill promises, such as his vow to save Andromeda from the terrifying monster, Cetus. Yet, Perseus was also faced with the complexities of fate. Unlike many other heroes who are set on paths of vengeance or conquest, Perseus's journey was marked by a series of divine interventions and challenges that forced him to wrestle with destiny. His mission to slay Medusa was not born from any personal animosity, but from the command of King Polydectes. Even when he was tasked with the impossible, Perseus did not hesitate. He accepted the challenge as part of his responsibility, determined to fulfill the task at hand. His actions were not motivated by personal ambition or glory, but by his sense of honor and duty. The encounter with Medusa, one of the most iconic moments of his journey, illustrates the struggle between external forces and personal agency. Perseus did not face Medusa alone. He was aided by the gods, Hermes and Athena, who provided him with the tools and guidance necessary for his success. Yet, despite the divine assistance, Perseus's triumph over Medusa was still his own. His ability to overcome the monster was not merely about strength or weapons, but about his cunning and willpower. Perseus had to look at Medusa indirectly, using the shield Athena gave him as a mirror to avoid the deadly gaze. This careful balance between divine aid and personal effort is a theme that runs throughout his myth, emphasizing that even the greatest of heroes must work within the constraints of fate and circumstance. As Perseus continued his journey, he became a symbol of transformation. His rescue of Andromeda, a princess bound to a rock to be sacrificed to a sea monster, is a pivotal moment in his story. Here, the heroic qualities of perseverance, bravery, and sacrifice come to the forefront. Perseus did not simply slay a monster, he saved a life, earning not only the love of Andromeda, but also the respect of the gods themselves. His willingness to risk his life for the sake of another exemplified the ideals of selflessness and compassion that are often at the core of mythological heroes. Yet, the myth of Perseus is not only one of heroic triumphs, but also of the enduring legacy he left behind. His actions were not driven by the desire to create a lasting name for himself. As he ascended to the stars, his fate intertwined with the heavens. Perseus's immortalization in the night sky speaks not only to the gods' approval, but also to the human desire for lasting significance. His story transcended his earthly existence, becoming a symbol of eternal resilience and the pursuit of the greater good. Perseus was not merely remembered for his slaying of monsters, but for the ideals he embodied: honor, duty, and a quiet courage that guided him through every trial. Perseus's legacy is reflected not just in the constellation named after him, but in the hearts of those who came after him. He became a guiding figure, inspiring countless generations to seek out their own potential for greatness, to rise above the struggles of the world, and to live with purpose. The myth of Perseus teaches that heroism is not found in the perfection of strength or the absence of fear, but in the ability to face adversity, make difficult choices, and act with integrity. In every retelling of Perseus's myth, from the poets of ancient Greece to the artists of the Renaissance and beyond, his story resonates because it reflects the journey of the human spirit. Just as Perseus was called to face monsters, we too are called to confront the challenges in our lives, whether internal or external. And just as Perseus rose above his trials, so too can we find within ourselves the strength to overcome the obstacles before us. The human spirit, like Perseus, is not defined by its immediate circumstances, but by its potential for transformation. Perseus was once an innocent child, cast into the world with nothing but the love of his mother and a legacy of divine intervention. But through courage, wisdom, and the pursuit of justice, he became a figure who transcended both mortal and divine boundaries. His myth offers an enduring reminder that our own capacity for heroism is not determined by our birth, our fate, or our external circumstances, but by the choices we make in the face of adversity. And so, as Perseus continues to shine in the night sky, his legacy becomes part of our shared human story. His myth, like the stars themselves, remains a constant, an eternal guide for those who look up to the heavens, seeking strength, wisdom, and hope in the face of their own trials. The myth of Perseus has not only endured through the ages, but has evolved and adapted, finding new life in the modern world. His story, with its themes of heroism, struggle, and transformation, continues to resonate deeply with contemporary audiences, inspiring adaptations in literature, film, and popular culture. In each retelling, Perseus's journey finds new meaning and relevance, offering timeless lessons to all who encounter it. From the ancient world to the modern day, his myth has become a symbol of the human desire for greatness and an enduring testament to the power of courage and resilience. In literature, Perseus's myth has been reimagined again and again. His battles against the monstrous forces of the world, his journeys to distant lands, and his rescue of Andromeda remain powerful narratives that continue to captivate readers. The story of Perseus has often been adapted to fit the values and ideas of each era. During the Victorian era, for instance, Perseus was portrayed as a model of moral virtue, his courage and resolve a reflection of the ideal hero in a time that valued chivalry and honor. In the 20th century, authors explored his character through more complex and nuanced lenses, often focusing on the psychological and emotional dimensions of his journey. These reinterpretations have allowed Perseus's myth to resonate with new generations, providing fresh insights into his character and motivations. The theme of heroism, particularly, remains central to the modern perception of Perseus. But in the contemporary world, heroism is often seen through a more multifaceted lens. Perseus's early life, marked by hardship and abandonment, speaks to the modern understanding of resilience and personal growth. His ascent from humble beginnings to heroism reflects the belief that greatness is not necessarily defined by one's origins, but by one's ability to overcome adversity. In this sense, Perseus's story has become an emblem of the modern spirit, the belief that anyone, regardless of their background, has the potential to rise above their circumstances and achieve greatness. Moreover, Perseus's relationship with the gods also speaks to modern themes of fate and free will. The gods in his story are not simply all-powerful forces who determine the course of his life. They are beings who offer assistance and guidance, but whose help is not without limits. Perseus's triumphs are not purely the result of divine favor, but also his own strength, courage, and determination. This nuanced relationship between the hero and the divine reflects modern ideas about self-determination and the importance of personal agency in shaping one's destiny. In the realm of film and television, Perseus's myth has undergone a number of reinterpretations, bringing his story to new audiences through the medium of visual storytelling. Movies like Clash of the Titans, 1981 and 2010, have sought to bring the ancient hero into the contemporary imagination, blending elements of adventure, mythology, and spectacle. These films, though often departing from the traditional story in some aspects, have kept the core themes of Perseus's myth intact: his courage, his encounters with monstrous forces, and his ultimate triumphs. While these adaptations may not always follow the original myth exactly, they keep alive the spirit of Perseus's journey, providing a modern platform for his story to continue its cultural impact. The character of Perseus in modern films also reflects the evolving understanding of what it means to be a hero. Unlike the ancient heroes of myth, who often acted out of a sense of divine obligation or glory-seeking, Perseus in contemporary adaptations is portrayed as a more relatable figure. His struggles are often depicted as deeply personal, and his triumphs are sometimes harder won. This focus on his emotional journey, his internal conflict, and his growth as an individual speaks to the modern desire to see heroes who are not just defined by their actions, but by their inner lives as well. These adaptations explore not only Perseus's physical feats, but also the emotional toll of being a hero and the complexities of his relationships with the people around him, particularly with Andromeda and the gods. Beyond the realm of entertainment, Perseus's story continues to shape the way we think about heroism and mythology in our everyday lives. The figure of Perseus is often invoked in literature, psychology, and even philosophy as a representation of the struggle for self-actualization and the overcoming of personal obstacles. In the field of psychology, Perseus's journey is sometimes seen as a metaphor for the process of individuation, in which a person confronts their own inner monsters and emerges transformed. His victory over Medusa, for example, can be interpreted as the triumph over fear and the unconscious mind, suggesting that heroism is not just about vanquishing external threats, but also about mastering one's own inner turmoil. In education and the study of mythology, Perseus's story remains a touchstone for understanding the universal themes that underlie all human narratives. Scholars continue to explore his myth as an example of the archetypal hero's journey, a pattern of transformation that appears in many different cultures and stories. Perseus's story is often used to introduce students to the basics of mythological structure, as it contains many of the key elements found in hero myths: the call to adventure, the trials, the divine helpers, and the eventual transformation of the hero. The myth of Perseus, though rooted in the ancient world, continues to provide both individuals and societies with a framework for understanding the heroic journey. Whether through literature, film, or academic study, Perseus's legacy endures because it speaks to universal themes: the triumph of courage over adversity, the complexities of destiny, and the power of self-determination. His myth reminds us that even in the face of impossible challenges, one's character, choices, and perseverance can shape the course of their life. In the modern imagination, Perseus is no longer simply a figure of ancient myth. He is a timeless symbol of the potential for greatness that resides in every individual. His story continues to inspire and captivate, showing us that heroism at its core is not just about strength or power, but about the ability to face the unknown, to overcome fear, and to grow through the trials we encounter. And as long as the stars above us shine, Perseus's story will continue to live on, inspiring those who seek to reach beyond their limits and find the hero within. The triumphs of Perseus, both literal and symbolic, have left an indelible mark on the world of mythology. In examining his myth, we see not just the victories over monsters and the gods' assistance, but a deeper exploration of human values, aspirations, and the complex relationship between fate and free will. Perseus's story is rich with symbols that transcend time and culture, resonating with universal themes of growth, transformation, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. The most notable of Perseus's symbolic triumphs is his defeat of Medusa. On a literal level, slaying the Gorgon is a heroic feat, one that is both dangerous and daunting, but it is also emblematic of the human struggle against fear, the unknown, and the darker aspects of existence. Medusa, a creature whose gaze can turn anyone to stone, symbolizes the power of fear to paralyze and imprison. In facing her, Perseus must confront not only a physical monster, but also the psychological and emotional forces that hold individuals back. His use of Athena's polished shield to view Medusa's reflection instead of directly facing her is an act of wisdom and self-restraint. It suggests that true victory over fear requires not direct confrontation, but careful reflection. And sometimes one must confront darkness indirectly to survive. Perseus's triumph in this moment becomes a metaphor for how people can overcome the fears that freeze them, achieving strength through knowledge, patience, and introspection. But Perseus's battle with Medusa is not simply a physical conflict. It is a moment of personal growth. It marks the beginning of his journey from a young, uncertain man to a hero capable of great deeds. His victory is not just the slaying of a monster, but the victory of self-discipline and courage over terror. The image of Medusa's head, severed and wielded by Perseus, becomes both a literal weapon and a potent symbol of his ability to control and master the forces of fear. By carrying Medusa's head, Perseus can turn his enemies to stone, but it also carries a heavy responsibility. His victory comes at the cost of his own innocence. It is through this victory that Perseus begins to transcend the limitations of his mortal existence, moving toward the divine realm that will ultimately claim him in the stars. Another significant symbolic triumph in Perseus's myth is his rescue of Andromeda, the princess chained to a rock as a sacrifice to the sea monster Cetus. This act of heroism reflects Perseus's capacity for selflessness and compassion. Unlike the more self-serving aspects of many other heroic myths, Perseus's rescue of Andromeda is motivated by a sense of justice and the desire to protect the innocent. Andromeda's plight symbolizes vulnerability and the destructive power of forces beyond one's control. Her rescue, then, is not just a moment of love, but of righteousness. The hero steps in not for personal gain, but to right a wrong and restore balance to the world. This episode in Perseus's journey is also laden with symbolic meaning about relationships, trust, and responsibility. The fact that Andromeda is saved through Perseus's intervention highlights the theme of salvation, where one person's strength can become the means of another's deliverance. Their union, subsequent to her rescue, represents the merging of two fates, and their marriage becomes symbolic of the harmonious balance between divine destiny and human choice. Their love story, entwined with Perseus's myth, speaks to the transformative power of human connection. Andromeda, once the helpless maiden, becomes the queen, her fate intertwined with Perseus's. The story shows that heroes are not just defined by their solitary feats, but by their ability to touch and transform the lives of others. The moment when Perseus finally ascends to the stars is another symbolic triumph, this time over the forces of mortality itself. As Perseus ascends to the heavens, his mortal life is left behind, and his existence becomes eternal. His transition from a mortal hero to a celestial constellation symbolizes the idea of transcendence. The ultimate hero's journey is not only one of physical accomplishments, but of spiritual ascension. In ancient myth, such transformations were not mere rewards, but acknowledgements of the hero's purity, sacrifice, and divine favor. Perseus's rise into the stars reflects the human desire for immortality and the eternal journey of the soul seeking to join the cosmos. Perseus's ascensions also speaks to the cyclical nature of myth. Just as he was once cast away in a chest by his grandfather, only to rise and overcome adversity, his final ascension to the heavens completes a full cycle of transformation. It represents the ultimate overcoming of life's limitations and the return to the cosmos, the realm from which heroes were often believed to come. The very act of being immortalized in the stars is the ultimate recognition of a life well lived, one marked not just by deeds, but by the ideals that underpin them. Beyond these personal triumphs, Perseus's myth embodies the symbolic journey of humankind. His path is one that mirrors the inner struggles of every person, navigating the trials of youth, confronting fear and adversity, and ultimately seeking a sense of purpose greater than oneself. The themes of growth, self-awareness, sacrifice, and transcendence are universal. Perseus's journey is the journey of the human spirit, from vulnerability to strength, from ignorance to wisdom, and from mortality to eternity. His myth shows that every individual is capable of heroic deeds, not necessarily through physical power alone, but through the strength of will, the capacity for empathy, and the courage to confront the darkness within and without. Moreover, Perseus's story reflects the tension between fate and free will. While much of his journey is shaped by the will of the gods, Perseus is not a passive participant in his own fate. He makes choices, sometimes difficult ones, that define his character and the outcomes of his story. His myth illustrates the balance between the divine, which sets the stage, and human agency, which determines the course. In this way, Perseus becomes a symbol of the human ability to navigate destiny, making the most of both divine guidance and personal choices. In the end, the triumphs of Perseus are more than just physical victories. They are a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome obstacles, to rise above the mundane, and to ascend toward the eternal. His myth continues to offer wisdom for all who seek to understand the deeper meaning of life's challenges, showing that the greatest victories are those won not just in battle, but in the heart and soul. Through his story, Perseus teaches that heroism is found not just in strength, but in wisdom, compassion, and the courage to face both the external and internal monsters of the world. The myth of Perseus is not merely one of individual triumph, but a key chapter in the larger narrative of heroism that spans across time and cultures. His story fits into the grand tradition of the hero's journey, a cycle of growth, challenge, and ultimate transcendence that echoes through countless myths. Perseus, like the heroes who came before him and those who would follow, stands as a symbol of the qualities that define humanity's enduring admiration for heroism: courage, wisdom, humility, and sacrifice. His life, marked by divine intervention and personal decisions alike, shaped the very idea of heroism for generations, establishing an archetype that continues to influence both myth and reality. From ancient Greece to the modern world, the myth of Perseus has influenced the portrayal of heroes in countless ways. His victory over Medusa, a literal and symbolic defeat of fear, set a precedent for many heroes who followed. In Perseus, we find a model of the hero who, while powerful, is not immune to the weight of fate or the consequences of their actions. In his own myth, Perseus must balance his mortal will with divine influences, a tension that defines much of heroism. This balance remains an essential element of hero narratives. Heroes may be aided by gods or supernatural forces, but their humanity, their capacity for choice, courage, and personal growth remains their defining characteristic. The heroes of later mythologies, whether those of ancient Rome, the Norse sagas, or even modern literature, owe much to the pattern set by Perseus. Take, for example, the heroes of the Roman tradition, such as Aeneas, whose journey to found the Roman people mirrors Perseus's own. Aeneas's tale, though distinct, carries echoes of Perseus's myth, from divine favor to the trials that test his mettle and character. In both figures, the hero's journey is not merely about outward success. It is about an internal transformation, one that shapes not just the hero's own future, but the future of nations or peoples. The myth of Perseus thus established an essential framework for the cultural and moral narratives that followed. Similarly, the Norse sagas, with their focus on gods, fate, and the warrior's path, reflect the same themes of divine intervention and human perseverance that are central to Perseus's story. The great Norse hero, Sigurd, like Perseus, confronts monsters, faces overwhelming odds, and ultimately achieves victory, though his fate, like Perseus's, is not his to decide. Perseus's myth influences the Norse conception of heroism, underscoring the tension between a hero's will and the inexorable pull of fate. Sigurd's journey, like Perseus's, serves as a blueprint for later heroes who are destined for greatness, yet must confront a destiny they cannot fully control. In modern storytelling, Perseus's legacy remains alive in the archetype of the hero who rises from humble beginnings to achieve greatness, who confronts monsters both real and symbolic, and who ultimately transcends the limitations of mortality. From comic book superheroes to epic fantasy protagonists, the shadow of Perseus looms large. Heroes like Superman, Spider-Man, or even Harry Potter share the central theme of Perseus's myth. They are ordinary individuals who, through acts of bravery and wisdom, achieve extraordinary things. Like Perseus, these modern heroes often stand between two worlds, the ordinary and the divine, struggling with their powers, their responsibilities, and their place in the larger scheme of things. In modern fantasy, we see echoes of Perseus in heroes who must navigate the challenges of their own identities, confront their fears, and come to terms with the expectations placed upon them. These heroes, much like Perseus, must grapple with forces beyond their control, but ultimately find the courage to shape their own destinies. In this way, Perseus's myth transcends its original context and becomes a part of a universal tradition of storytelling, one that speaks to the deepest aspects of human nature. Our capacity for heroism, our struggle against the unknown, and our desire for a legacy that will endure. The influence of Perseus extends beyond literature and film. His story, particularly his journey to the stars, resonates with the human longing for immortality. While his body may have left the earth, his image lives on in the constellations, a celestial reminder that even mortal beings, through their courage and wisdom, can leave an enduring mark upon the world. The image of Perseus in the sky continues to capture the imagination of astronomers, poets, and dreamers alike. To this day, when people gaze up at the constellation of Perseus, they are reminded not only of the hero's legendary deeds, but also of the potential within all of us to rise above our circumstances and transcend the limitations of the physical world. Perseus's legacy is also reflected in the countless works of art that depict his story. From ancient pottery to Renaissance sculptures, the hero's myth has been a subject of artistic inspiration for centuries. Perhaps one of the most famous depictions of Perseus is the sculpture by Benvenuto Cellini, created during the Renaissance. The statue, which depicts Perseus holding the head of Medusa, captures both the strength and the grace of the hero, immortalizing him in marble. Cellini's work, like many artistic representations of Perseus, speaks to the timelessness of the hero's journey and the continued fascination with his myth. Through such artistic works, the story of Perseus is preserved, reimagined, and passed down through generations. The influence of Perseus is also evident in the way his story has been passed down through the oral traditions of various cultures. In ancient Greece, the epic Poems and stories of heroes like Perseus were shared in public spaces, gatherings, festivals, and performances. These oral traditions helped solidify the cultural memory of Perseus and the values he represented. Even today, the storytelling traditions that have sprung from myths like his continue to shape the way we view heroism, virtue, and legacy. Storytellers, whether through spoken word, print, or film, continue to draw on the archetype of Perseus to inspire and educate. In every retelling, Perseus remains a symbol of what it means to be a hero. His myth speaks to our highest ideals: the courage to face adversity, the wisdom to make difficult choices, and the resilience to overcome the challenges that life presents. As time passes and new heroes emerge, the story of Perseus endures, guiding future generations on their own journeys. His legacy reminds us that heroism is not confined to ancient tales. It is a living, evolving force, present in every act of courage, sacrifice, and self-discovery. The myth of Perseus has endured not just for its action and adventure, but for the deep, universal themes it explores, themes that continue to resonate with audiences across cultures and generations. In Perseus's journey, we find not only a hero who faces monsters and gods, but also a symbol of the internal struggles that every human being must navigate. The fight between fear and courage, the conflict between fate and free will, and the balance between self-sacrifice and self-preservation. The continued relevance of Perseus's myth lies in its ability to speak to the heart of what it means to be human, making it a story that is both timeless and universally applicable. One of the most prominent themes in Perseus's myth is the tension between destiny and free will. From the moment of his birth, Perseus is a pawn in the larger schemes of the gods. His grandfather, King Perseus, trying to avoid the prophecy that his daughter Danae's son would one day kill him, casts Perseus and Danae into the sea in a chest. Despite this dark fate, Perseus's story is not simply about a predestined life. Although the gods play a role in shaping the path he takes, Perseus still makes choices that determine the course of his journey. In many ways, this balance between fate and free will is what makes Perseus a relatable and powerful figure. Perseus does not blindly accept the path laid out for him. He rises to meet the challenges before him with courage and wisdom. Even though the gods give him tools to accomplish his tasks, he must still decide how to use them, and his success depends on his choices and resourcefulness. This theme of free will within the constraints of fate is one that continues to resonate with modern audiences, who often face their own struggles between external circumstances and the choices they can control. Another central theme in Perseus's myth is the concept of fear. The most striking representation of this is his battle with Medusa, whose gaze can turn anyone to stone. Medusa is a terrifying figure, and her power embodies the fear that can freeze people in place, preventing them from taking action. Perseus's method of dealing with Medusa is a lesson in courage, not the kind that rushes headlong into danger without thought, but the kind that requires wisdom and restraint. Perseus looks at Medusa through the reflection in his shield, avoiding the direct confrontation with fear, instead using strategy and patience to triumph. This approach to fear, taking it on indirectly yet still confronting it, is symbolic of how people often deal with their own fears, by finding ways to face them while remaining grounded and safe. This theme of confronting and overcoming fear is not just about monsters, but about the internal battles everyone faces. Fear, in various forms, is something everyone experiences, whether it be the fear of failure, fear of the unknown, or fear of one's own limitations. Perseus's triumph over Medusa becomes a metaphor for the way in which we all must face our fears, whether those fears are tangible and external or intangible and internal. It is through courage, reflection, and wise action that Perseus is able to defeat Medusa, showing that fear is not something to be eliminated, but something to be understood and managed. Additionally, Perseus's rescue of Andromeda represents a powerful theme of selflessness and sacrifice. When Perseus sees Andromeda chained to the rock, awaiting her death at the hands of the sea monster Cetus, he does not hesitate. His desire to save her is driven not by personal gain, but by a deep sense of justice. He steps into the role of a protector, risking his life for someone he has never met. In this act, Perseus embodies the ideals of self-sacrifice and protection, traits that have been celebrated in heroes throughout history. His willingness to act for the good of others, even at great personal risk, reinforces the idea that heroism is not just about individual glory, but about the impact one has on the lives of others. This theme of selflessness extends beyond Perseus's physical rescue of Andromeda. The relationship between Perseus and Andromeda, their love story, is a poignant reminder of how acts of heroism can transform lives, not just through outward deeds, but through the emotional and moral growth that comes with those deeds. Andromeda is not merely a damsel in distress, but an equal partner, her fate intertwined with Perseus's. Their union symbolizes the importance of mutual respect, love, and shared destiny. It is in their shared triumph that Perseus's heroic journey is completed, not just in the external victories, but in the connections he forms and the person he becomes through his actions. Another vital theme in Perseus's myth is the idea of legacy. As Perseus ascends to the stars at the end of his life, his name is immortalized in the night sky. This final act is symbolic of the enduring nature of heroism. Despite his physical death, Perseus's legacy lives on, not only in the people he saved or the kingdom he ruled, but in the stars themselves. His story continues to inspire generations, not as a tale of a single man's greatness, but as a reminder that the deeds we do in life, whether big or small, can leave a lasting imprint. The idea of legacy also ties into the broader theme of immortality, where the soul of the hero lives on, influencing those who come after. Perseus's legacy is not confined to his earthly achievements, but expands into the very fabric of the universe, eternal and shining above. This theme of legacy is one that resonates deeply in today's world, where individuals and communities are constantly seeking ways to create meaningful lives that will leave a mark on future generations. In a world that often seems transient and fleeting, the idea that one's actions, no matter how seemingly insignificant at the time, can have lasting effects is both comforting and motivating. Perseus's ascension to the heavens is a powerful reminder that our lives too can become part of something larger than ourselves, whether through the relationships we form, the lives we touch, or the contributions we make to the world. Finally, Perseus's myth touches on the theme of transformation, not just the physical transformations he undergoes, but the personal and spiritual growth he achieves. From a helpless child in a chest to a hero whose actions will echo through eternity, Perseus's journey is one of profound change. The transformation of Perseus into a constellation at the end of his life represents the culmination of his journey from mortal to immortal, from uncertainty to certainty, and from fear to courage. His myth illustrates that growth is often painful and fraught with challenges, but it is through those trials that individuals become their true selves. Perseus's ultimate transformation speaks to the universal human experience of becoming something greater through the trials we face. In conclusion, the universal themes in Perseus's myth, fear, courage, fate, free will, selflessness, legacy, and transformation, are timeless and continue to resonate with humanity today. Perseus's story speaks to the core of human experience, reminding us that the challenges we face, whether external or internal, can lead to growth, wisdom, and greatness. His myth continues to serve as a beacon of hope and inspiration, showing us that, no matter the obstacles before us, there is always the potential for heroism, for change, and for transcendence. The myth of Perseus continues to captivate us, not only because of his ancient deeds, but because his story is so deeply embedded in the core of what it means to be a hero, an idea that resonates strongly in our modern world. Heroes today, whether fictional or real, often mirror Perseus in their struggle to balance personal growth with the greater good, and in the way their journeys are, shaped by both external challenges and internal decisions. In a world where we look to figures of courage and wisdom for inspiration, Perseus stands as an eternal model for the qualities that define heroism, not just the ability to overcome great odds, but the capacity for inner transformation and the pursuit of justice. In the world of modern storytelling, Perseus's journey still finds a place in the narratives of the heroes we admire. Much like the ancient hero, today's heroes face daunting challenges, whether these challenges come in the form of external threats or internal battles. In comic books, movies, and literature, characters who are faced with impossible odds are often forced to confront their own flaws and fears, much like Perseus had to confront Medusa. The psychological aspects of Perseus's heroism, such as his ability to take action even when faced with terror and the unknown, are qualities that are also seen in modern heroes. These stories often explore the deep personal costs of heroism, the internal conflict between the desire for personal safety and the moral obligation to act, much as Perseus himself faced. Take, for example, the many modern superhero stories where the protagonist is thrust into an unimaginable situation. These characters, much like Perseus, are called to action not out of a desire for glory, but because of a moral duty. Characters such as Spider-Man, Superman, or even Harry Potter all reflect this archetype. They are often unprepared, caught in circumstances beyond their control, and yet they rise to meet their challenges, guided not only by their own strength, but by the lessons they learn along the way. Their journeys mirror Perseus's in their struggle with fear, their relationship with power, and the growth they undergo to become the heroes they are. One of the most striking parallels between Perseus and modern heroes is the idea of guidance from external forces. In Perseus's myth, the gods play a significant role in aiding him. Athena gives him the shield, Hermes gives him the sword, and even Zeus, from his high perch, offers his protection. This divine help parallels the mentorship or external guidance modern heroes often receive. Take, for instance, the role of Alfred in Batman's journey, or Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. These mentors, like the gods of Greek mythology, offer wisdom, tools, and guidance to the hero, helping them realize their potential and navigate the moral and physical obstacles before them. However, what truly makes Perseus an enduring model for modern heroes is his ability to merge these divine gifts with his own agency. In the same way that modern heroes often must reconcile their extraordinary powers or gifts with their personal morals and humanity, Perseus must use the tools given to him wisely. His victory over Medusa, where he uses the reflection in his shield to avoid direct confrontation with her gaze, teaches us that while help may be offered, true heroism comes from understanding and applying one's abilities in a way that aligns with wisdom and compassion. This balance between divine assistance and personal agency continues to resonate deeply in today's stories of heroes who must learn how to wield their powers responsibly. In addition to this, Perseus's myth challenges us with the question of what it means to be a hero in a world filled with uncertainty and unpredictability. Perseus's humble beginnings, trapped in a chest with his mother, the product of a divine and mortal union, mirror the uncertainty many modern heroes face. They are often reluctant, not sure if they are fit for the challenges ahead. In this sense, Perseus's journey is also about coming to terms with one's purpose. His rise from obscurity into mythic status echoes the experiences of countless heroes who must forge their identities, often overcoming self-doubt before stepping into their heroic roles. For many of us, this mirrors the struggle of stepping into an unknown future, unsure of our ability to succeed, but finding strength in the pursuit of justice and right. While the gods may have set Perseus on his path, it is his choices and actions that define him as a hero. And it is here that the myth speaks to us most powerfully today. In a modern world where people often face moral complexities, where the boundaries between right and wrong are sometimes blurred, Perseus's choices, though guided by the gods, are still his own. His victory over Medusa, his rescue of Andromeda, and his eventual ascension to the stars are all actions he takes because he believes they are the right course of action, not because he is seeking reward or validation. This aspect of Perseus's heroism, the internal compass that guides him, is something we see reflected in modern heroes who are often motivated by personal codes of honor and justice. Take the example of modern anti-heroes, characters who do not fit the traditional mold of good, but who are driven by a sense of justice, such as Batman or the vigilantes in The Punisher. These characters are often morally complex, just as Perseus was, and they face similar questions about the nature of right and wrong. They take action because they believe it is necessary, not because they seek glory or divine favor. Their stories ask difficult questions about what it means to do the right thing, especially in a world that often seems morally ambiguous. Perseus's willingness to act, even in the face of fear or danger, is a key trait that modern heroes continue to share. Finally, the legacy of Perseus, the immortalization of his name in the stars, reminds us that the hero's journey is not only about the deeds accomplished in life, but about the enduring impact of those deeds. Perseus's name lives on in the constellations, a testament to the idea that heroism is not just about individual success, but about creating a legacy that transcends time. In modern narratives, this theme is echoed in the idea of legacy that heroes often strive to leave behind. Whether it's the symbolic legacy of Superman protecting Earth, or the legacy of hope embodied by figures like Captain America, These modern heroes, like Perseus, become symbols not only of their time, but of something greater, something that will inspire future generations. In a world that often feels disconnected and chaotic, the myth of Perseus continues to serve as a reminder that true heroism is about making a difference, facing our fears, and rising to the challenges before us, no matter the odds. The modern hero, like Perseus, must not only confront external monsters, but also the internal ones, fears, doubts, and moral dilemmas that challenge them on their journey. As we continue to tell the stories of heroes, ancient and modern, we are reminded that the spirit of Perseus's myth lives on, inspiring us to be brave, to be wise, and to face the unknown with courage and resolve. As we reach the final chapter in the myth of Perseus, it is fitting to reflect on the full legacy of this extraordinary hero. His life, marked by immense challenges, divine intervention, and eventual transcendence, stands as a testament to the power of human potential. Perseus, who rose from obscurity to greatness, faced monsters and gods alike. Yet his ultimate triumph was not in the external battles he fought, but in the internal transformation he underwent. His story is not just about the victory over physical enemies, but about the enduring qualities of courage, wisdom, and sacrifice that continue to inspire us generations after his myth first took shape. Throughout his life, Perseus grappled with the divine and the mortal, with fate and choice. He was the son of the god Zeus and the mortal Danae, a union that placed him at the intersection of two worlds, one of divine power and one of human frailty. His journey began with his humble, difficult beginnings, cast into the sea in a chest with his mother by the paranoid King Acrisius. From these early trials, Perseus's life unfolded into one of great mythological importance. It is through his personal choices, bravery, and wisdom that Perseus rose above the circumstances of his birth and the dictates of the gods, ultimately becoming a hero whose name would live forever in the stars. The story of Perseus is timeless because it reflects a core truth about the human experience: that heroism is not only about confronting external forces, but about the internal growth one undergoes when faced with adversity. Perseus's battles against Medusa, Cetus, and the forces of fate were battles he fought not just with strength, but with his character. His victory over Medusa was not merely physical, but psychological, an act of overcoming fear and using wisdom to defeat what seemed insurmountable. It is a lesson we can apply in our own lives. When we face challenges, it is not enough to simply have power or strength. It is the ability to meet fear with thoughtfulness, to use reflection and strategy that brings true victory. In his rescue of Andromeda, Perseus's story deepens further, reflecting the themes of selflessness and the heroic potential of compassion. He did not seek fame or reward. He acted out of a sense of justice and mercy, risking his own life to save a helpless maiden. In doing so, he embodied the idea that true heroism lies in acting for the good of others, even at great personal cost. This selflessness is what distinguishes Perseus from other figures in mythology, whose actions may have been motivated by pride, revenge, or a desire for personal glory. Perseus's actions demonstrate that heroism is not just about conquering external foes, but about making choices that reflect a deeper sense of moral responsibility. Perseus's final ascension to the stars, his transformation from mortal to immortal, is the culmination of his journey. It symbolizes the ultimate transcendence that all heroes strive for, the ability to move beyond the confines of the mortal world and live on as a symbol, a beacon of light in the heavens. His story, though concluded in the physical realm, continues to resonate in the stars above as a constant reminder of the power of heroism and the enduring impact of one's deeds. Perseus, forever immortalized in the night sky, is a symbol of light and hope, a reminder that even the darkest times can be overcome and that heroism endures. This final transformation also speaks to the idea of legacy. Perseus's name, now written across the stars, represents not just the man he was, but the ideals he embodied. His legacy is one that has passed through generations, inspiring poets, artists, scholars, and dreamers alike. It is a legacy that transcends the boundaries of time, culture, and geography. Perseus's myth has been retold in countless ways, each retelling shedding new light on his qualities, each telling ensuring that his example endures. In our own time, Perseus's legacy continues to inspire us in profound ways. His journey speaks to the timeless human quest for meaning, purpose, and greatness. In the face of immense challenges, Perseus was able to rise above, to meet the gods and monsters alike with courage, wisdom, and an unshakable sense of justice. His story serves as a reminder that heroism is not bound by time or circumstance, but is a universal call to all who seek to make a difference in the world. Whether we face personal struggles, societal challenges, or global crises, Perseus's example reminds us that the courage to act, the wisdom to choose the right path, and the selflessness to act for the good of others are the qualities that define true heroes. As we reflect on the myth of Perseus, we come to realize that his story is not just a relic of ancient times, but a living myth, one that continues to offer us guidance and inspiration. In the stars above, Perseus's constellation shines brightly, a symbol of hope and perseverance. Just as he overcame the odds and found his place among the immortals, so too can we find the strength to rise above our own challenges and leave our own legacy. Perseus's story teaches us that every hero's journey is marked by trials, by moments of fear, and by the need to make difficult choices. But it also teaches us that the greatest heroes are those who choose the path of selflessness, who act with courage in the face of adversity, and who leave a legacy of light for those who come after. As we face our own trials in life, we can look to Perseus's story as a guide, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found, and that heroism, in all its forms, will always endure. As we reach the end of this long journey, the legacy of Perseus endures, an eternal star in the heavens, guiding and inspiring all those who seek courage, wisdom, and heroism. His myth reminds us that heroism is not about perfection or invincibility, but about the strength to face one's fears, to act with justice, and to transcend the boundaries of mortality. Perseus's tale, like the stars above, will continue to shine brightly for generations to come. Thank you for listening. May the stars above continue to inspire you as they did Perseus, guiding you on your own path, wherever it may lead. Sleep well, and remember, within every challenge, there lies the potential for greatness.